mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of the board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under subchapter. The chair also should inquire as to whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. Are there any from any committee members? Seeing none, we will proceed. We have the minutes that were sent out the 30th of August for this meeting. And they're before you, the 2024 July minutes. So if you've had an opportunity, I'll entertain a motion that we approve those minutes as written, as presented.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Baumgartner, thank you for making the motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Ellison, is there any discussion on the minutes on that motion? Thank you. Seeing none, all those approved say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Yeah, but the information item I'd like to start with this afternoon. July 1, 2023 to June 30, 2024 annual report on water supply, watershed protection, universal stormwater management, and NPDES MS4 programs. Michael Lawyer. Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Everyone should have a copy of the annual report, correct? Okay. So I was asked to just give a very short or brief presentation, just kind of highlighting some of the items on the report. So the Water Supply Watershed Protection Program, adopted in 1992, revised and approved in 1995, revised and approved again in 2019. Requires local governments having jurisdiction within a water supply watershed to adopt and implement a watershed protection program. There are currently 229 watersheds that are classified and 295 local government programs. Those programs must have an ordinance that at least meets the state's minimum requirements and maintain the watershed map. Our state Water Supply Watershed Protection Coordinator, which is positioned in the stormwater program, is currently vacant. But that position conducts audits of the local government programs, reviews and approves boundary change requests, and provides technical assistance. The USMP, or Universal Stormwater Management Program, is an alternative program. Allows local governments to adopt a single set of post-construction stormwater requirements, satisfying a variety of different stormwater programs. There have been no new USMP adoptions for this reporting period, and there's a list there of the current local governments that are administering a USMP ordinance. And I'll just note that the City of Trinity is in the process of revising their ordinance such that they would no longer implement their USMP once that revision is complete, approved, and implemented. And I do not know the current status of that. The NPDES MS4 program is part of the Federal Clean Water Act. It's been delegated to North Carolina. The components include permitting, compliance and enforcement, or audits, and providing technical assistance. I do also have an MS4 coordinator position. It's still a person in that position, but it requires, the program requires those permitted municipalities to implement their own stormwater management program composed of various components such as public education and outreach, participation, post-construction stormwater management, the elimination of illicit discharges, and good housekeeping practices. There are currently 121 MS4 permittees throughout the state. That includes 6 large or Phase 1 municipalities, 105 small or Phase 2 municipalities, 4 military bases, and 6 non-traditional MS4s, such as the Department of Transportation, NC State University, UNC Chapel Hill. And so during this reporting period, 25 of those permits were renewed and 7 of those permittees were audited. And then note there that of those 7 audits, 1 that was compliant, 2 that were issued a notice of deficiency, and 4 issued a notice of violation. And so this report was compiled by Paul Clark, who was the former Water Supply Watershed Protection Coordinator. That position is still currently vacant, and I'm actively trying to fill it. And Isaiah Reed, who is our MS4 coordinator. Report was compiled with their information and then reviewed and approved by myself and Toby Vinson, our interim director. Try to entertain any questions.
Mike, thank you for the presentation. I know it was quick and the fill in, but I asked Director Rogers if we could have this today in reference to the NPDES information that we had earlier and the RIA, the Regulatory Impact Analysis that the Water Quality Committee is reviewing and questioning comments that came from that in relation specifically in the areas of impacted properties. And since the watersheds, and there's so many of them, I did not write the number down, but I know there's over a couple of hundred watersheds that these properties within our state is likely to be affected. And I wanted this, this committee to see what this annual report looks like. I think it started out, and this is June, June 1 last year into June 30 this year. So we're starting this new year, and with the possible impacted properties that we're looking at involves the watershed pieces. So we're all working the puzzle together, I think, and I thought it was a good opportunity for the committee members to hear what your department is doing.
Okay.
Any questions from committee members? Commissioner Twitty.
I mentioned the watershed coordinator position that's currently open. How long has that been, or vacant? How long has that been vacant? Is that a position that's trying to be filled?
Yes, it's been vacant going on 2 months now.
Okay.
We've received applications. I've conducted interviews, made a selection, basically waiting for HR to give final approval before extending an offer.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns with the presentation? Any further staff pieces or presentations that you want to add to Michael's piece? If not, thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate your time
Thank you.
putting this together.
Sure.
The next item on the agenda is an action item to request approval to proceed to the EMC with amendments to the TAR-PAM wastewater discharge requirement rule 15A NCAC 02B 0733. John Heisman, like the Heisman Trophy. I remember you told me that last time. It's easy to remember. Thank you, John. You've been working on this a long time. And as I recall, the association's director was here at our last meeting, and you and the association, your department, were getting together and working something out. So from what the indications are from Director Rogers, y'all have put something together and worked it out. So we're here today to take action on what y'all have worked out. We've worked on it a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Chairman Keen, members of the committee. Again, I'm John Heisman. I work in the non-point source planning branch here, the Division of Water Resources. And I'm here today with an action item requesting your approval to proceed to the November Environmental Management Commission with amendments to the TARPAM wastewater discharge requirements rule. As part of my agenda item, the package include a copy of the proposed revisions to the TARPAM wastewater rule, the OSBM approved regulatory impact analysis, and a letter of support from the TARPAM Basin Association, which is that collection of wastewater dischargers that are subject to the rule that we worked with very closely over the better part of the past 2 years on drafting these revisions, both at the staff level meetings, meeting with our deputy director and director, and I appreciate all the collaboration with that group. So what I want to do is I presented an information item to you all back in May, it's been a few months, so I wanted to capture a little bit of that history before I get into the proposed changes, just to kind of give you an overview of things. And I just wanted to start out with this slide that gives you an overview of the TARPAM nutrient management strategy that we have in place in this basin. And the TARPAM is a little bit different than our other river basins, where this strategy actually started all the way back in 1990. And that first iteration of the strategy was this agreement between the division and point sources, this strategy agreement that addresses the chlorophyll A impairment in the estuary based on modeling and TMDL results. The overall goal in the TARPAM is a 30% reduction in nitrogen load and no increase in phosphorus load relative to the 1991 baseline. Again, trying to address that chlorophyll A impairment by reducing the nutrient inputs into the estuary. Under this agreement that was first formed in 1990, a Wastewater Compliance Association group, the TARPAM Basin Association, was formed, and they were assigned nitrogen and phosphorus caps to stay below, and those caps were eventually put into their permits. So that was like the first part of the strategy. Then following that, in 1997, the EMC adopted a point source rule that just addressed non-association members, so all the other point sources that aren't part of that agreement. And it was specifically about non-association new and expanding dischargers, requiring these new and expanding facilities to meet discharge technology limits and offset those new and expanding loads by funding agricultural BMPs. Following that, in the early 2000s, the EMC adopted non-point source rules for the TARPAM with reduction requirements for row crop agriculture, new development stormwater rules, and riparian buffer protection. So we've kind of had this long process of developing requirements, but I just want to impress upon you that I'm here today to talk about the TARPAM Basin Association and the wastewater rule, but I just wanted to make it clear that we have a comprehensive nutrient management strategy addressing the estuary for both point source and non-point source. So that agreement that started in 1990, what that was a signed accord between the Environmental Management Commission. At the time, it was the Division of Environmental Management, now DWR, the Division of Soil and Water Conservation, and two environmental groups in the watershed came together and signed this accord, along with the TARPAM Basin Association, which is a 15-member municipal wastewater discharge association. And as I mentioned, under this agreement, it established these end-of-pipe collective nitrogen and phosphorus caps. Those caps set this compliance where as long as the association is under those caps, all the individual members of the association are considered in compliance with their individual allocation. And the agreement also provides the flexibility that should the association ever exceed their caps, they could offset those exceedances by funding agricultural BMPs through the Ag Cost Share Program. The agreement was started in 1990 and further revised in 1995, 2005, and the most recent iteration is in 2015, and it expands. We call this the phase 4 of the agreement. It goes from 2015 to May of 2025. And I wanted to stress that over this 30+ years of having this agreement in place, the TARPAM Basin Association has remained below their nutrient caps during this time and have not required to purchase offsets to offset any exceedances. And most recently, they're at about 70% of their nitrogen cap and 60% of their phosphorus, and they've been holding pretty steady at that level for the past decade or so. This is a map of the TARPAM Basin, just giving you a sense of where these 15 facilities are throughout the river basin. They're scattered through all the way from the top of the basin with Franklin and Oxford down to the estuary where City of Washington and Warrenton are located. Collectively, the association members have a collective permitted flow of just over 62 million gallons per day. In reality, their actual flows are hovering around half that, it's around like 30 MGD. And these 15 members represent almost 99% of the permitted flow in the basin. So they represent the vast majority of the point source flow in the basin. And they vary in size. I mean, some of the bigger players are, Greenville, Rocky Mount, City of Washington, and there's some smaller facilities like Pine Tops, Robersonville, and others that are much, much smaller. So a wide range of different facilities, but all of them are municipal wastewater treatment plants. So you might be asking, after 35 years of having this agreement, like, why are we now proposing taking those requirements from the agreement and putting it in the rule? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that agreement's coming up for renewal in 2025, so the timing is good. Also is the fact that in recent years, the division has been under increased pressure to make sure that any requirements that we have out there that the regulatory community has to meet, that those requirements that meet that Administrative Procedures Act definition of a rule, in fact, are placed within a rule, rather than have them in some sort of policy document. By putting these requirements, moving them from the existing agreement, and putting them in the rule, it establishes a more enforceable foundation for the requirements that we have in their individual and group permit. And by having that more enforceable foundation, it helps us avoid any potential legal challenges in the future, and also gives us an opportunity to modernize the language during the process and improve clarity where things might not be as clear. And as I pointed out, throughout this process, we've worked very closely with the Tarpon Basin Association on these rule requirements to make sure that we're on the same page moving forward, because again, the main goal here is to take those current requirements from the agreement and just codify them within the rule. So before I get into what we were proposing revising the rule with, I just wanted to get clear what the current Tarpon wastewater rule covers. That current Tarpon wastewater rule, again, was adopted in 1997 and updated during our rules readoption process back in 2020. And this rule is limited to addressing new and expanding facilities only. And it requires any new and expanding facilities to obtain existing allocation or offset credits to offset that new or increased load. It provides that clear regulatory pathway for allocation trading and purchasing these nutrient offsets. And during that 2020 readoption, we did broaden the coverage from not just addressing new and expanding non-association facilities, but to also address new and expanding association facilities, that these requirements would go into place once the current agreement expires in May of 2025. Other updates to the wastewater rule back in 2020 included updating the treatment standards for these new and expanding facilities. Basically, if you're new and expanding, you would be required to meet equivalent concentrations of 3.5 milligrams per liter nitrogen and 0.5 milligrams per liter phosphorus. For industries, it would be industry-specific best available technology limits. Made it clear in the rule back then that Tarpon Basin Association members can expand within their current nutrient allocations, so they can expand within what they currently have in allocations, and could possibly be concentration limits that are higher than that's required of those non-association members. And we also updated the offset process back then, where we tied it into the nutrient offset rule, the 0703 rule. And what that does, it shifts away from using the fixed BMP cost formula in the ag cost share program. Instead, ties the offsets into using private mitigation bankers and division mitigation services. And that helped us with having readily established offset rates for both nitrogen and phosphorus, which we didn't have through the ag cost share program. And again, I just want to stress that the current rule does not address the Tarpon Basin Association group compliance requirements that are currently addressed in that agreement. So what we're proposing to do is take that agreement, move those existing requirements, and put them into the existing wastewater rule. And to do that, we did things like adding definitions that we just pulled from the existing permits that just address, defining what the association is, the difference between active allocations and reserve allocations. We also pulled from the agreement the actual group cap allocations for nitrogen and phosphorus for the association and put those numbers in the rule. That's that 891,000 pounds of nitrogen, 161,000 pounds of phosphorus. Those are their group caps from the agreement. We also put within the rule the individual nitrogen and phosphorus allocations for each of the individual 15 members of the association. And we made it clear in the rule language that should there be any future changes to the allocations, whether it's through transfers between facilities, new members joining the association or leaving, we recognize that those allocations could change and would be updated within the permits. So they're not stuck because they're in the rule like that. And then again, we just continue with the cap exceedance process of allowing offsets of any exceedances that they be purchased in accordance with that nutrient offset rule, again, using private mitigation bankers or Division of Mitigation Services offset credits. Some other aspects of the revisions include adding flexibility to meet the requirements of the rule. And that includes something from the agreement where we provide the option to use existing offset credits that have been earned by the association under the terms of the agreement. Over the past several decades, the association has earned roughly 59,000 pounds of nitrogen credit by funding various activities, BMPs and stream gauges within the watershed that have earned them this credit under the terms of the agreement. And we recognize that they still have that credit that would be allowable under the rule for a one-time use as an offset. Another big point of discussion we had with the association and worked through is by adding a new option that allows for the use of reserve allocation for new and expanding facilities. And what I'm talking about here when I say reserve allocation is back when the agreement was first formed, there was a lone industrial discharger that left the association and stopped discharging back in 2004. And the allocation that was originally signed to that association member was set aside at the time. And we refer to that as a reserve allocation, has not been used, but we recognize that that 59,000 pounds of nitrogen and 4,000 pounds of phosphorus is in reserve and would be available to both non-association or association new and expanding dischargers. Now, again, if you're new and expanding, you have to meet that 3.5 and 0.5. So those would be the equivalent concentrations for using that reserve allocation. As I mentioned earlier, the association was allowed to expand within their current allocations, but if they do request to use this reserve allocation, they would need to meet that 3.5 and 0.5 nitrogen and phosphorus. And that was a big discussion we had with them and worked through that. We also added to the rule clarification, recognizing, as I said, the association encompasses all the big players. There's a very small handful of small dischargers that aren't part of the association that serve very small communities. And it's very unlikely, they haven't expanded in 30 years, but should one of these small facilities expand, we provide this exemption that if you're expanding but still below 100,000 gallons a day, you would not be assigned nutrient allocations. That's just recognizing that these are very small impacts serving small communities that likely don't have the tax base to implement these requirements. And it's very unlikely, but we just thought it was necessary to include that to not have any unintended consequences. The final part of the revisions was just adding some administrative aspects, just recognizing how transfers would work. And that's that idea, if you have an existing facility accepting wastewater from another facility that results in eliminating that other discharge, you would then transfer the allocation from that one facility to the receiving facility. Also, just adding language to the rule, just recognizing the core aspects of the agreement. Again, recognize that an association can meet its allocations collectively. Individual members are in compliance as long as the association as a whole is staying under the caps, giving that offset option, and making it clear that if an association, however unlikely, were to disband, or if a facility leaves the association, or for whatever reason was kicked out of the association, they would then be required to meet the requirements set forth in their individual NPDES permits. Again, I have this in here, but I just want to make it clear that all of these proposed revisions were discussed at length with the association. Wanted to make it clear to them of the reason why we felt it was necessary to move this into the rule, but also not changing the core framework and implementation of the agreement we have in place with them and simply just moving those current requirements and codifying them in the rule while adding additional flexibility. Along with the proposed rule revisions, we did have to do a regulatory impact analysis. And as I mentioned before, since we're not proposing new requirements on them, we estimated that there's no new cost to regulated community or state or local governments. And as such, there's no substantial economic impact as defined by that statute. And, you know, within the RIA that we worked with OSBM, we just, again, highlighted the necessity for these rule revisions, just codifying those existing requirements, meeting that APA definition of a rule, providing that enforceable foundation that for the permit requirements, and just modernizing the language and adding some flexibility. This is the current timeline of the process moving forward. We spent the summer refining the revisions with the Tarpon Basin Association, working with OSBM to get approval on that RIA. We're here today in September asking for your approval to proceed to the EMC. With your approval, I plan to come back in November to ask them for permission to then go out for public hearing and comment that we plan to hold following the holidays in January and February. And ideally, we would have our hearing officer report and all the deliberation of the comments wrapped up and hope to come back to you by May of 2025 for adoption of those proposed revisions that would allow us to have them in place soon after the current agreement expires. So with that, I just wanted to state our action item request where we are requesting approval to proceed to the EMC to request public notice and hearing of the proposed amendments to 02B.0733. And I am happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Commissioner Ellison had a question earlier, but he was kind enough to wait until you
Oh.
finished.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very good presentation. That was, and all your presentations are well delivered, and I appreciate that. But was this originally the impetus, the Pfiesteria outbreaks? Is that how this all got started?
I mean, the management strategy as a whole, yeah, I mean, it was back in the early 80s, late 70s. I mean, we just saw
Okay.
a lot of those algal blooms, fish kills. So yeah, that was really that start of the need and the EMC identifying the issue back then.
Okay. You said that right now the members are running about half of their permitted flows,
Yes,
but they're using 60 to 70% of their allocated loads.
yes.
Have there been any projections of where this is going in the future in terms of that imbalance?
We haven't done projections. There are provisions so the association actually has their own set of bylaws. And if they ever were to hit 80% of their caps, they're required, and to be clear, we actually have something in the permits as well. Once they hit that level, they're required to do evaluations and projections and assessments about improvements that they can make.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, is there anyone from the association here to
Yes.
support their efforts or your efforts on this?
I did want to recognize Adam Waters, who is the executive director of the Tarpon Basin Association, is here.
Any other questions for John while he's at the podium? Commissioner Twitty?
Hey, John. You probably covered this in a previous presentation, but how is the cap established? The nitrogen and phosphorus cap?
So the caps were established by looking at the modeling that was done back in the early 90s that was used to establish the TMDL and come up with the goal of a 30% reduction in nitrogen and no increase in phosphorus. And at the time, they looked at what the 1991 discharges were for these facilities and did calculations looking at those 1991 loads, considering what percentage of the load the point sources represented being delivered to the estuary. And I think at the time, they estimated like 18% of the load was coming from the point sources, and used the percent reduction goal, their delivery, to come up with a cap that represented, in theory, a 30% reduction from those 1991 loads. So as long as they stay below those caps, theoretically, they should be achieving those reduction goals of the TMDL.
Commissioner? Yes, sir.
So is that a done deal on that analysis? That's kind of what it is and that's what it's going to be going forward? Or is that something that's reevaluated periodically with the modeling and assessment?
So it's something that, I mean, it's been set that way, those caps, since the first agreement. We've updated it as like any members have joined or left, and they just kind of take out those individual. We've had discussions over them in the years about the possibility of revisiting the allocations, but that would definitely be a more detailed process that would involve additional modeling that has not taken place. And I think it would also probably require not just looking at point sources, but looking at the management strategy as a whole. But it's something that is set in the agreement. We are putting it in the rule. We recognize that it could change, but that would be its own process as well. That would require a lot of input from the association and the public and go through like basically that public facing process.
Ex officio member, our chairman from the EMC, Chairman Solomon.
Yeah, and I got a little experience with this whole thing, so I go back to slide 9, if you will, because it's just
Let's see, actually, 9, okay.
one, the person that left the industry, were they part of the association?
They were, it was this like wool spinning, national spinning facility. They were a member during phase 1 and they left at the end of phase 1 in 2024. I'm sorry, at the end of phase 2 in 2024.
So that was part of the association's NPDS permit. And now it looks like in that third bullet, you're going to open it up to people that are non-association members to use that allocation. So are you really reducing the cap they have in their NPDS permit?
See, back when National Spinning was a member of the association, we actually didn't have all of their allocations in their permits. The permits just kind of pointed to the agreement. And the agreement laid out the process for as facilities come and go, how the cap would be adjusted. And it wasn't until I think it was 2009 to 2014 time period, EPA said, hey, you need to make sure that these allocations are actually in their individual permits. But at that point, national spinning didn't exist anymore. So we did put each individual facility's allocations in their individual permits, but set aside what was in reserve from national spinning. And during the most recent iteration of the general permit that captures all of them, we got comments back from the Tarpon Basin Association saying you need to reflect that there is this reserve allocation out there that's not part of our cap here. So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
So it was never theirs to start with, then, what you're saying?
It was a member of the association, but we did view it as set aside. And there's been dispute over the years about like who technically owned that allocation to the division versus the association. That's where we saw a compromise of keeping it set aside, recognizing there could be some economic development, some new discharger come in and make it available for use by them should they apply for an NPDS permit.
Okay, I was just different, and Mr. Waters may have another comment, but that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments for John? Mr. Baumgart.
John, just curiosity, this has been a fascinating agreement to watch over the years. What would be the function of the association now that exists in rule, other than just kind of still managing some, you may have said it, I missed it.
I mean, the big thing,
Ask Adam up if you want to, if you like. Adam can come up now because he was to help you support that effort.
sure. I mean, I'll just add as he's coming up and we see, the association still plays the role and there's that added benefit of being a member of the association that, you have an allocation, but as part of the Tarpon Basin Association, you are provided that additional benefit of that group cap, where you're not required to meet your individual allocation unless that association as a whole is exceeding, but of course they're staying well below it. But I'll turn over to Adam.
And John hit that dead on. That is the benefit of being a part of the association. Also, it allows for some resources, especially for some smaller communities, to lean on some of the other larger communities for support and experience.
Thank you.
Any others? Thank you again, John, for working on this. We are being asked by the department Division of Water Resources request approval to proceed to the EMC with the request for public notice and hearing for the proposed amendments to 15A NCAC 02B 0733. Do we have a motion on the floor? What's the pleasure? Commissioner
Read that
Ellison?
again.
There it is right there. You can if you'd like. Yes, sir.
I'll move that the Division of Water Resources request be approved to move to the full EMC and request for public notice and hearing for the proposed amendments to 15A NCAC 02B.0733.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Deerhake with the second, I'm sorry. With a second, any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. The next item on the agenda, number 3, is listed as action, continuing the PFAS surface water quality rules development process. Your quick update on this before we get started. In May, DWR informed me that preliminary RA draft had not been approved by OSBM, but the department was working on it. I requested the RA draft be sent to the Vice Chair, Michael Ellison, and me for a quick review before launching RIA attachment for information on the May agenda, the OSBM, for their approval. The plan would prioritize the time needed for discussion at the Water Quality Committee May meeting, WQC May meeting. The day before the agenda was launched to the public in May, I directed Director Rogers to remove the unapproved and not identified as a draft RIA from the DEQ website representing the agenda. Furthermore, I asked for the same presentation that was scheduled to be presented in May to be moved to the July meeting. July continued PFAS discussion. It was encouraged that no action be taken due to OSBM approving the RIA, including the appendices, just 4 hours before the meeting. With nearly 46 pages and 82 changes having been made within the entire document, addressing these changes was deferred till the September Water Quality Committee meeting today. Today, after a short 10-minute presentation from the staff, our action today for the first time is to address and proceed with PFAS discussion pertaining to over 100 questions, concerns, directives, and comments in reference to the OSBM approved fiscal note regulatory impact analysis with appendices, which was presented to DWR from the Water Quality Committee August the 7th. I've asked Commissioner Bumgarner to facilitate the question as question manager. He's taken these questions, thoroughly gone through them, and laid them out in different departments. So he will be doing that, and it will take the remainder of the time that we have until 4 o'clock at our next meeting for groundwater and waste management. Actions may be considered by me, the chairman, after these questions, concerns, directives, and comments with any part or as a whole to the fiscal note, regulatory impact analysis, which will by then be fully vetted, hopefully by 4 o'clock. At this time, then, I'll ask Director Rogers for a quick overview on his end and the presentation, as you have indicated in the agenda, be quick so we can get to the questions and answers, which will be facilitated by Commissioner Tim Bumgarner. Thank you, Director Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to continue our work on the development of the surface water quality standard for PFAS. To date, we have all put a great deal of time into this rulemaking process. The Water Quality members, the staff, and other stakeholders as well have dedicated their time and energy in reviewing, commenting, and questioning the proposed draft rule and draft RIA. Creating a surface water quality standard for PFAS is a bold step. It is complex, it is difficult, as expected. DEQ staff has been working for more than 2 years in development of this rule and looking at PFAS standards. And we provided presentations to the Water Quality Committee and the EMC for over the past year on this topic. In my mind, there's been time well spent. Today we'll continue that discussion and hopefully make significant progress in moving this rule forward as we feel that it needs to be done. I will note, Chair King mentioned 10 minutes for a presentation. We got notice of that just a couple hours ago. So I will be doing the presentation and it will be brief.
Thank you, Director Rogers.
So I'll be going through the first 2 slides and the last slide is my intention. As Chair Keene mentioned, the comments from the committee meeting in July, as well as the comments that Chair Keene provided the department, numbered over 130. We have taken time, staff has taken extraordinary amount of time in providing comprehensive responses to those questions. As we did, we noticed and putting the categories related to the responses from the questions and comments from the committee. As you can see on the row above, we identified the groupings of the questions and then the numbers of those questions in each one of those groupings. As you can see, there's about 3 of those areas where significant questions have been asked, and a majority of the questions. The water quality standard development was an area of very much a focus of comments and questions from the committee. Also, implementation schedule, I think, is another question that folks have with regards to the rule. Finally, the quantitative benefits. As you can see, by far and away, we got the most questions in that area. We had organized our presentation to address these 3 areas, and we wanted to get into some more detail, respond specifically to some of the questions that were asked in these areas. So as I mentioned, our effort in the presentation, and hopefully you'll take time to look through it and review it. And obviously, with any of the questions that come up, we'll be glad to reflect on our comments there. We have staff here to address those questions as well. From the implementation, our focus was on questions related to the tiered approach, the types of facilities affected by the rules, the 3D listing, and also rule alternatives. The water quality standards, we were prepared and will address questions related to the input values used to derive the standards. And then the benefits category. Again, this is where we got the most number of questions, 73 questions and comments related to this area. The 3 top categories that were of in question by the committee were the surface water affecting groundwater associated with exposure to the impacted private wells, surface water affecting irrigation, crops, and associated with food intake related agriculture products, and also the property devaluation from affected residential properties. Pardon me while I skip through a few slides. So in summary, as I mentioned, we spent 2 years working through this process. We have done our research, we have done the due diligence, we have reviewed the science and applied it in order in the development of the RIA and also the rule. The certified RA addresses the extent of PFAS contamination present in North Carolina and the cost proposed surface water standards on industry and water treatment will be required. The certified RA also addresses the benefits of North Carolina that are valid, justified, and quantifiable. The Water Quality Committee, we requested that we remove some of those benefits. We don't agree with that. Hopefully we'll have further discussion on that today. The certified RIA and the changes suggested by the Water Quality Committee should be proceed to public comment. based on public process and the recommendations of the hearing officer's report. The RIA can then be modified and recertified. Our point here is that all of this is a draft. It's a draft RIA that's been approved by OSBM. It is a draft rule. Public comment needs to be received. We've received the committee comments, and it is our opinion that it is time to move this forward through the committee on to the public forum to continue to receive public comment in order to process this rule appropriately and bring it back to the commission after public comment to make it a final rule and a final RIA. Thank you.
Question from Commissioner Ellis.
Just very quickly to clarify, you would put the RIA to public comment as it is, or with the modifications requested by the committee?
We feel that we need to wait till we get the extent and the full public comment before we get and revise the RIA. So we can do that at once and not have different iterations of it moving forward. So our proposal would be to move forward with the comments in hand and go out to public notice and public hearing, get further comments, and then revise the RIA as a final RIA to be approved by the OSBM.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I turn it
So,
over now.
Chair, I will just say we do have staff here. We'll be glad to respond to the questions. And I would, hopefully, we have a little hard hearing, so if we're speaking to the mic so that we can make sure we get the right staff up for the questions. And I don't know, Commissioner Baumgartner, if you reference where it is in the document, it would help us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rogers. Turn this over now to Tim Baumgartner, who will handle the questions, concerns, comments, and directives moving forward on the RIA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try to go through this as expeditiously as possible. And Richard, I will try to reference, and I guess other commissioners, as we're going, will reference where this is in the document as well. So you noted on your slide, Richard, that you guys have been working on this for 2 years. We have a written draft as of July of the last meeting. So that's an important difference to make sure people understand is this committee has had basically a month or 2 weeks before July, the July meeting, and then the time period between now to review the regulatory impact analysis that was provided. So I think that's an important thing to note. It's an important thing for the audience to recognize as well. That being said, I'm not sure what version of RIA we're talking about now. There was a version that went out pre-July meeting 2 weeks before.
Yes.
While we were sitting in the meeting, there was a version evidently that was approved by OSBM that day. And I guess there was, after the July meeting, we saw a version that had red lines. We saw a version that had highlights. So one thing that I would suggest is we've got a document control issue. What version are we looking at? And I would suggest too that we need a cover sheet or something. I realize there's an official format for these RIAs, but there needs to be a cover sheet or something showing which version we're looking at and which version we're considering at this point in time, because I looked at what was on the web and I can't really decipher that.
For clarity, we took the yellow copy. I took the yellow copy, which I was instructed that was the final approved OSBM at the last meeting.
Yes.
The yellow highlight.
Right.
What was taken from the red line.
Yes.
The yellow highlighted is in the agenda, correct?
Yes. Yeah, on the agenda, we attached, attachment D is the final RIA, approved RIA for OSBM. At the chair's request, we also attached the highlighted version, which took into account the red line, but highlighted where in the document changes were made by OSBM. So your final approved RIA is attachment D in your attachments
Which
on
is,
this
for
agenda.
clarity, it's not a draft. It's the OSBM approved
It's a
RIA.
Draft OSBM
This
approved
one,
RIA.
that was sent to all of the committee members to question. And in that question, that was sent back to you and your staff on that final approved OSBM. And this is the questions that we're falling into today, the Q&A that falls alongside, not the draft, but the final OSBM approved
So
RIA.
I do
fiscal
think
year.
we need to make a clarification here. I think that as we move forward in this process, these are all draft documents until they get through the public hearing process, at which time consideration for changes to those documents will be made. It will come back to the EMC to propose and approve a final RIA. So that's how we're referencing the draft
All right.
at this time.
So we have questions from that.
So I guess the banter back and forth now proves my point. There was multiple documents going forward. I don't think members of this committee, I couldn't decipher that. And Steve had, Commissioner Chair Keen had his thoughts on what it was. Others may have had their thoughts on what document we're reviewing. So I think just proved my point. So we move on. So on that note, Richard or whoever, you just stated that you guys have not provided any more edits to the regulatory impact analysis draft from the questions provided. So for those in the audience that don't know or haven't been following, attachment C represents, that was posed to represents questions that the committee consolidated, Chair King consolidated and provided to DWR since the July meeting to make sure that when we came into the September meeting, we could continue to have very good discussions and try to move things forward as much as possible. And so based on those questions and the responses you guys submitted, you've had no revisions to the draft, whichever version it is, at this point in time?
No, we do not.
As you noted, the benefits was a major topic in most of those questions. And some of the central themes this committee had were related to the consumption piece, the benefits for consumption, use of private wells, and also property values.
Yeah.
Too much on my desk here. So can you point out in the document where surface water alone is justified as a benefit? I'm not talking about consumption. Take the benefits out for consumption, take the benefits out for private wells and food. Provide where the benefit of just doing this standard for surface water is in the document. Can you point that out?
Do you mind reiterating the last part of your question?
So it seems that the document relies on the benefits of putting the standard in place on three things: consumption, private wells, and property. Where does surface water stand on its own as having these standards benefit surface water?
Well, the way that we connect those is utilization of surface water. So I think, Franny, can you speak to surface water standards in general, what they protect?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What you say?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Chris Ventolaro. I'm a Water Quality Standards Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. And I just want to make sure I understand the question. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason why all of these things were considered in the benefits is that these are all influenced by the surface water, the potential contamination of the surface water. The uses to be protected tie into all of these different components, whether it's consumption through drinking water, the surface water supplies, through impacts due to surface water and groundwater interactions, et cetera. So I think that's the short answer, but please, just let me know if I didn't quite interpret that correctly.
Wasn't what I was looking for, but let's
Okay.
dive into the benefits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes, sir.
Okay, ex officio, but I'm just looking at page 9, Chris and Stephanie, that say, page 9 of the documents, that the purpose of the proposed rules, this is the purpose and need statement. The purpose of proposed rule is to establish numeric water quality standards that will protect designated uses, i.e. drinking water, swimming, and fishing of surface water bodies such as streams, rivers, and lakes from deleterious effects of PFAS. And I think the question is, if that's the purpose, then what's named here is drinking water, swimming, and fishing. I'm just
And-
asking, this page 9,
So,
purpose of this whole thing.
so we do agree that that is one purpose, but we need to understand that surface water alone can impact other aspects of North Carolinians every day beyond just those uses. And in the absence of the rule, the presence of PFAS, we have demonstrated can have negative impacts on various natural resources, human health, and the environment. And so that's where we pulled in the benefits, which are required as part of a regulatory impact assessment, is to look at the broader benefits to the public, not just the cost to the regulated entities.
Okay, let's dive into benefits. Maybe we'll flush this out as we go. Consumption is a major benefit that's provided within the regulatory impact analysis. If you refer to appendix C, I'm saying that correct? Attachment C, excuse me. Questions provided were around pages C43 to C46. C61 was one area, C75, C83. There's many assertions in those benefits that there's several of us that have concerns that commission, as this is a commission document, and DEQ are stepping beyond the bounds of what our limits are. Commissioners Reardon and Yarborough have plenty of experience in this realm, and if I could defer to Commissioner Reardon first, and maybe Commissioner Yarborough on the top.
Thank you, Commissioner Baumgartner. Some of the questions that I had in looking through what in one of these RIAs, and that maybe I wrote my comments on the first one or the second one or third one, but either way, I had three major concerns that I wanted you to help me understand. It says it's taken into account, and I'll use your words here, taking into account these values, it's estimated that exposure to food has been shown to contain PFAS would be 7.1 to 7.4%. And adjusting to the higher mass of that, it's that PFAS in food relative to drinking water of 3 to 1 of PFAS exposure at 21 to 23%. Do you remember that? If you go a little bit further in the RA, and I'll kind of bring this together in a package for you, it says based on the estimates and the currently available data, we calculate that exposure to ingesting food containing PFAS for the purpose of this benefit was 21 to 23%. So stay with me just a minute. If you go a little bit further, so the exposure to PFAS from food can be 6 times as high relative to drinking water when compared to the mass of these compounds, comparing the estimated exposure of food to be 21 to 23% versus drinking water. So when I read what you wrote here, what I think you're characterizing to say that consuming food is a very significant exposure of these compounds. Am I reading that right?
Yes, and that would agree with following the scientific literature that has demonstrated that beyond drinking water, one of the primary routes of exposure can be via food.
So let's stay right there where we are for a minute. So when we think of the body of work and the primary responsibility in this country, if it's a meat and poultry item, it's going to USDA, correct? If it's a food item, it's going to FDA. Is that correct? We all know that, right? So as a federal agency, and we're a state agency, and we heard earlier talk about resources and all of this, we look to our federal agencies to help us navigate some of these turbulent waters. I think we would all agree to that. So did a little bit of research here into this to see where FDA has published literature, put on their website, made available to their constituents some of their work. So it says here that nearly of 1,300 samples that they collected from the marketplace, I know you're familiar with this, it says no PFAS was detected in 97% of those 1,300 samples. So they went on to do some additional work in 2018. And in fact, they went down to the federal area and collected 20 samples because of the concern of Gen X and Chemours in that area. And even though they did detect some PFAS in that area, you might suspect they would, it says based on the best available current science, the FDA has no indication that these substances at these levels found in a limited sample presents a risk to human health. But they go ahead and do some additional sampling, and they are doing sampling now. I'm very aware of that. So if they went into 2019 total study, 88 samples were collected during the fiscal year of 2018. No PFAS was detected in 87 of those 88 samples. So if you look at the national data that our federal agencies posted on their website, in summary here, again, 87 of 88 samples had no PFAS they detect. Of the other 1,300 samples, 97% had no PFAS. But if we look at the data that I read to you out of RFA, it clearly suggests that nearly 20% of the human exposure is coming from food. My concern is, have we overstated the exposure of PFAS from food? You do go as far as to say in your report that not everybody in North Carolina eats all food grown in North Carolina. We eat from a variety of places. I'm concerned with the way this is written and the percentage that we're associating for PFAS from food is going to unduly implicate the food in North Carolina as being laden with PFAS, or that our national food supply is laden with PFAS, that we expect 20-some% of our exposure to come from food. And so that is deeply concerning to me. And I know, Commissioner Baumgartner, we can get into the questions and the responses that they have to it, because I have some concerns with your responses there. And so I'm hoping you can help me understand how we can have a 3% exposure rate on FDA's testing, but yet we're equating 22% to be originating from food. So help me understand that. Is that a fair question? Yes, sir. Yeah.
I think that is fair, and we did recognize that FDA study and some of the concerns we had there. But the first thing I want to note is that what we're talking about is research showing evidence that PFAS can be taken up into various foods. We can see it accumulate in the food chain by just having cattle consuming water. One of the main goals, not just protecting downstream drinking water sources and reducing treatment burdens and so forth and recreational exposure, we're also recognizing that we do understand that agriculture is a very important and huge aspect of the North Carolina economy. What we're pointing out is that the decades of uncontrolled releases, one of the consequences can be that we could see PFAS found in our foods. Okay. I do want to note that the 21% exposure versus the 7 was simply a way for us to be able to leverage the EPA health outcomes from drinking water to make sure that we were normalizing and comparing the same mass. We do feel that the scientific evidence that we did use to come up with that 7.1 to 7.7 exposure is very conservative. We understand that not all food that is grown in North Carolina is kept in North Carolina, but we also need to keep in mind that consuming one fish could be a significant dietary exposure. PFAS found in meats could be potentially exposure. So overall, the fact that we looked at foods that have only been shown to potentially uptake PFAS foods that could be grown in North Carolina or in homes and backyard gardens. We do feel that the 7 to 7.7 is very conservative. And the reason why we're talking about a 20% exposure again is just to normalize on a mass basis for a health purpose. So when you look at the starting point of the foundational Sunderland paper that looked at the point of exposure of talking about 60 to 70% could be from PFAS, the number that we used was only actually 7% because we tried to take as much North Carolina specific exposure because we're trying to link reduction in PFAS in North Carolina surface water on items that are grown in North Carolina.
Yes, sir, Chairman. So if we look even at the 7% or the 20% that you said here, I'm concerned that that doesn't reflect what the national data that FDA is posting is showing. The prevalence level that you're projecting with the numbers you're using doesn't match the federal levels in which they've done the testing. So that leads, and I go back to a sentence in your report, that DEQ is not the subject matter expert on food, FDA is. And so I'd like to see, and I hope in this, that the primary federal agency responsible for this has a role in determining if, in fact, these numbers are right. I'm not saying they're right or I'm saying they're wrong, but from a layperson perspective, they don't line up very, very well. I will also, if I could go just a little further. This is one concerning to me too, because North Carolina, we live here, right? And we want safe food, we want clean water, we want our citizens to have availability, all of that. Everyone sitting around this table and everyone in this room. But you go on to say in this, and this is on page C46, if PFAS is found on agriculture land, it would be important for the site owner to determine what is being grown or managed that can be impacted by PFAS. Testing their irrigation water, biosolids will be the next steps in determining where and how much PFAS impacts can be minimized or eliminated at the site. Long-term, it will be imperative that PFAS discharges to the environment are controlled to avoid continued contamination. My thought process on that is, and it says where PFAS is found on the farm, what's missing from that conversation at what level? I do not think, in fact, I know, that neither USDA or FDA have established investigatory levels. Is that correct? Do you know that?
I'm not familiar with that.
But you agree with me. So they, at this point, now the European community, European government has established investigatory levels, but only for 2 compounds, PFOA and PFOS. But in the language here, we say PFAS, 14,000 compounds or whatever that number is. My concern is by getting this in writing, establishing that if you detect PFAS on a farm, which can be at 4 parts per trillion or 2 parts, whatever the analytical capability is, it would predispose that the owner of that farm should do an investigation on their farm or their water source, biosolids, the commodities they grow, test every bit of this. But yet what we've not done first is established a national threshold. Not all PFAS are the same. We'd agree on that, right? Some long chain, some short chain. And not all levels of detection would promulgate or precipitate an investigation. Would it be advisable if we're going to say there should be investigations on every farm in North Carolina and by every farm in the nation, that the first step in this is having national investigative levels? Would that be, is that a fair statement? Would you agree with that? We have to have some thresholds here, right? Every 3 parts per trillion of PFOA may not trigger, with ubiquitous as it is, forever compounds, may not trigger an investigation on that farm or necessitate a thorough investigation on that farm. The first thing we do is establish threshold investigative levels. Is that fair?
I would say that is outside of DEQ's peer review. One of the reasons why we added that response is I believe you had asked Commissioner Yarber about if PFAS is found on property, what can be done? And we had done some due diligence on some real world examples where a farmland did have PFAS and they were able to change what they grew and how they managed that property to not have to stop selling crops and so forth. So I would say that is the purpose of that response.
So So I just want to bring another piece, having a conversation about this. DEQ would like to bring the attention of the EMC attention to a recent example of a local farmer impacted by PFAS in their irrigation water and was unable to sell their crops due to the presence of PFAS. What regulatory agency prohibited those products to go into market?
That owner was not prohibited by any regulatory agency. He just felt that it was in the best interest to not sell that because PFAS was found. And they knew the health concerns associated with it.
So let me read again what we got wrote here. DEQ would like to bring to the EMC's attention of a recent example of a local farmer being impacted by PFAS in their irrigation water and was unable to sell their crops due to the presence of PFAS. He or she made a decision not to do it, but there was no regulatory impediment here either offered by FDA or NCDA or any other regulatory agency to prohibit those products to go to market, right? To your knowledge. Is that correct?
Knowledge, no, he just didn't want to put his head in the sand and he wanted to protect human health.
That wasn't in your report. That wasn't listed that way. The way it was listed was that he couldn't do it.
He was unable to sell their crops.
That's exactly right. That's a big difference between those two comments there.
Well, I would say, misconstruing the statement, and there's a news article that would follow his decision to do that. But we wanted to recognize that I know the committee wanted North Carolina specific data, and shortly after our EMC meeting, that was there. And I felt like this is an example to show that this is something that our citizens are dealing with.
And I'm perfectly fine, but I think the point that Commissioner Yarborough made, this was not a regulatory decision. I don't want anyone reading this document to say that a person was growing product, was unable to sell it, and there was some legal impediment to them putting that product either by a state agency or a federal agency. I think that's an important consideration. I'll summarize my comments to go forward is what I'm concerned is that we're putting percentages in these documents, either 7% or 23%, that the human exposure to PFAS is from food. But even our national agency primarily responsible for this body of work shows an incident rate and an exposure rate in food of less than 3%. But yet we're equating human exposure over 22%. What I'm fearful of is that taken out of context with what could be here, either overemphasizes the percentage of PFAS attributed from products grown, harvested in North Carolina, or even nationally. And I'll go back to a previous leader, we should do no harm here. And I'm concerned without having our federal agencies look at this and agreeing's fine. That's fine. I'm not asking for the federal agencies to disagree, but I think there's an engagement here with our State Department of Agriculture and primarily our Federal Department of Food and Drug Administration to say if what we're representing here is what they're seeing on a national level. And I'll stop there.
Just one follow-up on that. So just to reiterate, DEQ has not discussed with FDA or NCDA and CS at all. Have you engaged this benefit and this discussion at all with any of those agencies? Okay, I take it as a no. Yeah. Okay. Real briefly, Chairman Solomon.
No, and again, it makes official, but I just want to add, this is on page,
I don't know that we know the answer to that question right now.
okay.
Okay.
Well, it's not referenced in the document.
Yeah, it's
so
not referenced.
You would have cited that reference had you
Probably referenced, yeah.
probably, yeah. On page F4, and I don't want to support Commissioner Reardon's comment, but on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet, just to show you how a comment could be taken out of severe context.
What page you on, please?
F4 is what I've got on the yellow highlighted version, which should be the OSBM
Is
approved.
there any way to put these up on the board if people want to be able to see it that may be attending this meeting? I think it'd be very helpful.
And while they're doing it, Commissioner Reardon, I had your paragraph highlighted about percentages because it was one of those math things I do. And this one just falls in right above it. So as you were talking, I went back to my document and just
Thank you.
looked at the percentages, but this is F4, Stephanie. And again, but it's the danger that's tucked in here, the implication of scaring North Carolinians and our ag community and our people that are producing food. Right there, that bullet right above the yellow highlight that's added in there says approximately 25% of the food ingested, North Carolinians inject. Now, North Carolinians inject food from everywhere. In fact, I looked it up. We can't even say what percentage we get from in-state or out-of-state. But this statement right here says approximately 25% of the food North Carolinians ingest was projected to be food impacted by PFAS through surface water. That's almost reckless without any kind of defense from.
And the main
from-
reason I asked the questions to you about what happens when you find it, and also what happens when you find it from places that have had biosolids supplied, that every citizen in a municipality waste treatment plant can't landfill it, can't burn it. It's been put out on agricultural land. So they're not getting the benefit of it, but you put something like that on it, it makes it sound like we're in 1900. In 1900, we had over 90% of the people lived on the farm. They probably ate most of their food right where they produced it. Today, that's not the case. We don't produce, when I was growing tomatoes, I was lucky to get 6 weeks of crop out of it. What am I going to eat the rest of the time?
Let me give you some, Commissioner, may I get
I
some?
was just going to say, my final follow-up though is we produce certain crops here, that peanuts, sweet potatoes, pork, whatever, and we reference that in this document.
Yeah.
Not everything we consume is here. So it's not just,
Very
it's
small
not just the
percentage,
food.
actually.
And we need these national numbers because that's the dietary mix of North Carolinians. But certainly our food is not proven by FDA to have that much PFAS in it. It's not.
And Commissioner, if I may speak again. And so I encourage everyone that's sitting in the audience to go on FDA's website. Don't take my word for this. Go on FDA's website and pull this information and read it, because you're going to see that, again, of 1,800 samples, or what was it? Let me give you the exact number. 1,300 samples, 97% of it showed no PFAS whatsoever. I think there's where my concern lies.
I would like to just add, looking at those studies, one thing to keep in mind is as analytical techniques do evolve and become more efficient, that detection limit of the compounds that FDA used were high when we reached out to analytical experts like Dr. Knappe. So I would say, more recent data with more sensitive techniques, I think is going to give us a better picture. Although I do understand what FDA has put out there, but there is robust scientific studies out there that are showing that PFAS can be found in foods. So I think we need to consider.
So let me clear my comment. I'm not saying PFAS cannot be detected in food. There's no question with the work they did in Fayetteville, they showed that. Toxicologically, they said they were not toxicologically significant. They were detecting down to 13 parts per trillion in some of these very complex matrices. Testing for PFAS in a food matrix is significantly different than water. I know we both would agree on that scientifically. But even and this was in 2018, they were able to test and confirm down to 13 parts per trillion in a complex matrices like cabbage. So their testing was fairly sensitive even just 6 years ago, but I don't want to argue that point. But again, in summary, I'm suggesting the national data doesn't show what we see on that slide, that 25% of the foods were in North Carolinians ingest was projected to be food impacted by PFAS through surface water.
In fact, I will say there's no way possible for that to be. I mean, I'm that adamant about it that it's impossible for me to believe that statement there. The other thing is, a farmer's out here by himself, and all of a sudden you come out and you say somebody finds it. What are you going to tell him, and what are you going to do with it? That's a heck of a question to ask somebody. If you're trying to grow a crop, you can't produce it that way. It's no different than what happened with triazines in the Midwest, with atrazine is a good example of that. All of a sudden they could find it. Yes, they found that triazine. They found atrazine. At one time it was like, oh, it's the end of the world. But in reality, it worked because they were able to reduce the source, started planning on their application methods, reduced those numbers, and lived with what they had because it already was there. By your own admissions in North Carolina, we automatically say these biosolids, we can't landfill them. We don't landfill them anymore. We can't burn them. So what do you do with them? You land apply them because why? The soil is a dynamic thing. It will take things out of the ground. So, but with statements like this, you'll scare people to death to be able to utilize what they're actually producing or buy from. That's a terrible statement. And I'm not normally this crazy to talk this way, but this is to me, is probably the worst diatribe I've read in a long time.
Commissioner Ellison had a quick question, and then Commissioner Yarborough.
Quickly, the farmer who didn't sell their crop, they chose not to do that because PFAS were found in their groundwater or the irrigation water. Is that correct? And is this anecdotally reported on some blogger, or is it from a reputable news source or a peer-reviewed journal, or is this just hearsay?
This was on a reputable. This was a local news source. It wasn't a blogger. It wasn't a peer-reviewed article. But it was one where they found PFAS in what they were growing, and they linked it to their agricultural, their irrigation water, and have since installed treatment.
Commissioner Reardon, you have anything else?
I don't do reserved comment later as we move forward some of these questions. And again, my main concern here with the impact of North Carolina agriculture and national agriculture is let's make sure what we're saying, that the federal agencies who have unlimited resources, it appears, or not as finite as the state has, also concur that this level of exposure and incidence associated with food is similar to what they see at a national level, because the impact here is not only North Carolina's product, but it's the ability for North Carolina products to enter the national food stream.
And they will use that as marketing. Can I make one more comment?
Yes, sir.
And international marketplace.
The international. I understand wanting to be the leader on this. I understand that. And thank you for it, for wanting to be the leader. But sometimes when you're a leader, you need to look back behind you and see if anybody's following you. I'm not exactly sure who's following this from. When you start picking on the agriculture, you're doing us and not have any rules or regulations or why you're doing it. It's pretty simple. This was a legal product for a long time, not their responsibility. They didn't apply this product. They don't have any option. And all of a sudden you're going to sit and say, well, if we find it, this is what we're going to do. They're going to have to mitigate it on their own.
The department's language is they have to, they recommend doing an investigation on that farm, and there may be a point when an investigation is warranted, but it may not be at 4 parts per trillion on bottled water. There needs to be established national investigatory levels that the federal government has helped establish that would trigger that investigation.
Similar to what happened with phosphorus, and you're talking about the 1900, the 0200 rules. We have numbers there to be able to use. You don't have a single number for farms.
I think we got 2 other benefits, so we need to move on. Commissioner Deerhake had it.
I'd like to make a motion, though.
Yes, sir.
Can I make a motion?
Let Commissioner Deerhake
make a
speak.
motion.
And then we'll-
Not yet. Let's, as we started it, let's get through vetting. I think there's 3 or 4 lanes that we're in. Some of what Director Rogers had brought of the overview. So let's work into these lanes and let Commissioner Baumgartner finish up his first piece, if respectfully.
No, respectfully, sir.
Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you for recognizing me. I would like to ask the staff if they would like to respond to the statement about that bullet, and if they would like to explain it a little more to us, or what their intent was with that statement.
Again, reminded, as we go through this process, let's be as thorough as we can, but remember, we have about 35 more minutes. And so we want to move as quick as we can through this. Okay, thank you.
Yes, this is Sushma Mace-Moore, Assistant Secretary. So I'll try to answer your questions more at a higher level and have Stephanie follow up on the bullet itself. So I want to step back a little bit and to answer your questions. And all of these questions are very reasonable and legitimate, and we understand where they're coming from. We are stepping back to the upstream of these questions. So the question we're asking as part of this rulemaking is, what is causing the exposure to North Carolinians due to these PFAS? And our regulatory authority, this body and DEQ, lies in our surface water regulations. So what we're saying is that when PFAS is released into the environment from those surface water releases, it eventually makes its way down to other receptors, natural resources, our drinking water supplies, whether it's groundwater or not, but it also ends up everywhere else, including the rivers, the tributaries, the streams, the lakes, the ponds. These sources actually support the irrigation and the growth of the crops, what the animals drink. And so when that surface water that's coming down from a discharger is laden with PFAS, then the exposure of that PFAS is through that water. And then we're saying, okay, that water is consumed and used in these multiple places, whether it's a private citizen with a private well, or whether it's an agricultural facility, or it's a backyard garden. It's the water that we're connecting this to. And that is not, I don't believe that this committee is disputing that connection. Although there were questions that were actually asking us to explain the connection between surface water and groundwater and surface water and this irrigation water that we're using to connect to the exposure. So the exposure to the food that we're applying here is then downscaling it to what crops are used or grown in North Carolina that could be laden with this PFAS coming from that surface water. The record shows that 86% of the water used in the agricultural practices, whether it's to grow crops or to raise animals, are extracted from surface water intakes. So if those waters have the PFAS, then what we're secondarily implying is that that PFAS is also being consumed by the animals and also by the crops. And so then the question is, how do you account for that avoided cost to that exposure? And that's where the translation is occurring. We're not saying that all of this is there. What we're saying is by having a regulation that reduces that PFAS in those surface waters, and therefore you're reducing the concentration in those waters that are ultimately used for these purposes, then what are the potential benefits associated with that? And Stephanie has done the homework, the research, the best she could based on, like you said, limited data to estimate what the North Carolina grown crops may have PFAS amounts, and then be able to use and translate that into the available health data that is available from the EPA's MCL's paperwork. And that includes the ingestion component. I know this gets quite complicated, but I wanted to just provide that background, and she can explain the 7%.
So
Thank you.
We need to hurry up and move on. Chair Solomon,
Just to clarify, that should be approximately 25% of the food that has been identified that can be impacted by surface water is what we use. We're not saying all of food in North Carolina, 25% has PFAS. So that could be one editorial clarification that would be helpful.
And to your point here, though, that's what we ingest. We don't even, you're estimating that from what's out of state and in-state. I don't even see the studies of what our dietary balance is across North Carolina, out of state and in-state products. We don't consume just in-state products, but you're saying 25% of the food we ingest is PFAS. So you're making just a North Carolina statement, but you're making a national statement too. It
We're
just doesn't,
saying
there's no
what-
evidence for that.
What can be grown here are identified 43% of that 60 to 70% exposure
And
could have food that could be impacted by surface water. And of that, 25%.
And I'm trying to minimize my comments as an ex officio member, but what I will say to the assistant secretary is, these models are great, but we've got no proof on the front end in the analyticals that's been done, and we've got no proof on the back end, because we haven't even talked about sickness and the health effects, the death effects or whatever, that we can't justify those either coming from food. 75% of the benefits for this RIA are coming from this food category, from this ingestion. 75% of what we're doing is coming from food, and we don't have any evidence on either end. Any hard evidence. We got plenty of models, so I'll stop there.
I
I'll
go
be
back
quiet.
to my initial question when we first started this, that evidently confused the matter. Where is the benefit just on having surface water standards that clean the water? And we're relying on this major benefit that is being portrayed in this RIA of consumption relies on data that the DEQ has not consulted with their other partners on to develop that assertion. So Mr. Chairman, I don't know.
Commissioner Baumgartner, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
please, Easy.
Mr. Chairman, you've implied that you're going to cut the meeting off at 4 o'clock. That means we have 30 minutes left. We have this as an action item. I don't see us making enough progress through these detailed questions, which are really intended to be in the public arena, not prior to public notice. And I'm concerned that you're going to cut this meeting off, and once again, we'll have no progress made on this package today.
Commissioner Deerhake, I'm concerned that we're going to submit an RIA that committee members, commission members are not comfortable with. So I disagree that we should send this for public notice when we as commission members have problems and issues and would like to see some things addressed in this RIA before it goes out. I think that's just short-sighted.
I can quote from the statute what our charge is and what role we play with the RIA, if you like, if the chairman would permit me.
Quote away.
That's, Commissioner Deerhake,
Are you really cutting it off at 4?
in consideration of the next committee that meets at 4, that puts that committee out at 5 or 5:30. In reference to that meeting, I'm trying to get to it, but I don't want to. We've heard this and heard this and heard this almost for nearly 2 years as well. So, I want to get to the bottom of it. I think that was the initiative to begin with. But we do have over 100 questions from this committee on the RIA. And again, the regulatory impact analysis does not belong to the department by statute. Statute 143-214.1, water quality standards and classifications, duties of the commission. This committee is vetting the RIA to put it into hands of the EMC. And we want the EMC to have what they can have that's been vetted in every way, so it doesn't get hung up in the EMC, no matter. That when it gets there, it can move on out to public comment, and you get your hearing officer and the people, instead of just using these listservs to send out one letter from 500 people, that they will go to these meetings and these public hearings will be held. But today is the business of this committee. And the committee members, each one has an obligation, and you're certainly free to discuss your part. But I've given the questions that were presented by the committee members. That Q&A has been put together and given to the department, and they've had the opportunity to,
Mr. Chairman, I will point
they've had
out,
the opportunity to answer
I'm
that.
passing around the email that I sent you on August 6th, and I will point out that none of my comments were included in the package that
They were sent to the
is being
department.
facilitated today.
They were sent to the department, and I did not receive those in the way
You
that
asked me
each
to
one.
send you my comments. I did. They're not captured in today's package whatsoever. So I feel like my comments, my positive comments on this RIA are being ignored. You said you would take care of it, and It's not in the package that you distributed.
I've not seen this.
Yes, that was the email I sent you on August 6th, and you said you would include them.
Give us the bill.
I mean, my comment is that 150B-21.4 states that the agency must submit the fiscal note to OSBM for review and certification before publishing a proposed rule. The agency, that is the staff, it's their role to write and submit an RIA to OSBM, not the EMC's role. Historically, that's the way the EMC has worked. The RIA is one work product considered in the rulemaking package. If the EMC members had comments on the RIA, it should have been shared with the agency before the RIA was submitted to OSBM. But doing so indicates EMC members have more expertise in performing a detailed and financial and health and environmental benefits analysis than the agency staff. What certain EMC members are doing now, in my opinion, is overreaching its duty and leaving the public with the impression that they're controlling the RIA process to achieve the outcome they desire and what some stakeholders desire, rather than what an objective financial analysis should produce. I'm sensitive to the food safety question. I understand where he is talking about this, but this is not setting food consumption advisories. This is just to inform the benefits analysis. The EMC leadership, in my opinion, is not adhering to the administrative procedures for fiscal and regulatory analysis in 150B-21.4. Further, it's my opinion that the EMC leadership could be disregarding the administrative procedures of public comment by selectively using certain stakeholders' comments to modify the certified RIA before inviting all of the public to comment. It's after the public comment process that the agency staff and the EMC hearing officer consider public comments on the proposed rule package, which includes the fiscal note, to recommend the final rule text to the full EMC. Those recommendations can consider the comments on costs and benefits. Then the full EMC weighs the hearing officer's recommendations in its decision-making. So in summary, the fiscal note is not the only resource the EMC should use. Costs are not intended to dictate a yes/no vote on a rule. It is one of the factors to consider. Please keep in mind that we, the EMC, are here to decide how to achieve protection of human health in the environment. First and foremost is protection. If more than one regulatory option achieves protection, then costs can help inform that choice of the best option. So thank you for letting me say that. I'm very concerned about the process that's being handled today. Food safety is, of course, ultimately important to all of us, but I'm concerned that we are putting the food safety, we're taking some of it in many respects out of context. I understand the fear, but I also understand that we have a nationally respected food safety expert, and I feel like we're not being fully aware of what risk could potentially be if we use water that has PFAS levels in it to irrigate our crops and to feed our cattle.
Thank
So,
you, Commissioner.
Thank you
Nate.
very much for letting me say that.
Thank you for your comments. I'll turn it back over to the question manager that we have indicated beforehand, Commissioner
Yarborough.
Bumgarner, to continue with these.
Commissioner Yarborough, any last comments? Commissioner Keen, honest, do you want to make motions after we go through the questions? Is where you want the motions? Do you want one now?
I would like to, if we're finished on the food piece, if that's a big part
That is.
of what's been determined here in the committee, then it's the pleasure of this committee to move
But
in that
sir,
direction. Wait a second.
Have we
Wait,
finished
one second.
discussion of all of the comments and questions?
We've got there's a
What's that?
concern here that the department has not interacted with agencies concerned with food. And it is my thought that we need to move to direct that this committee, the EMC, have an opportunity to meet with and receive comment from FDA and the Department of Agriculture before this RIA moves forward so that we can understand that situation a little bit better.
I'll make that into a motion too. I'm willing to read that if it certs a time that the chairman feels like this is the time to do it.
I'll allow the food motion. Yes, go ahead and make that motion.
The EMC Water Quality Committee does not accept nor take any action related to the RIA benefits category, human health benefits, also cited as human health in Table 20 or in Appendix F in the section entitled Estimated Exposure to Food Containing PFAS in North Carolina, until members of the EMC meet with FDA and receive a written response that the information related to food in the U.S. and North Carolina is accurate. And I'll entertain that as a motion.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. Any discussion? Or yes, Commissioner Ellis?
A general point, very, very much related to the food and also many of the other issues that have been raised by the committee members to the department regarding the RIA. I think it would be kind of embarrassing if this RIA goes public as it is right now, and the public comments and a lot of the most critical public comments came from members of this committee. So let's get the RIA right so that we can get and the rule right.
The comments that I'm hearing
Commissioner Jerry,
today,
go ahead.
thank you. And the comments that are coming in on the RA are selective. They are from specific parties that are interested in this rule for their own benefit.
I object to that, not my own benefit.
Not your benefit. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about outside parties who are communicating with the EMC. They're sending out letters. It's not part of the public process. We have not entered the public process, and they are influencing the content of this RA at this point, whereas it's supposed to be an objective, staff-developed process by the agency, not by the EMC.
Chairman?
Commissioner Baumgartner.
I reject that assertion that we are being guided by people from the outside. You're making it seem like we don't have brains to look at this ourselves and make these determinations ourselves. And I'm a little sick and tired of that being the assertion of members of this committee, that we're being driven by outside sources. I've got an agricultural background. I've got a degree in agronomy. I've studied this process a lot. I haven't studied as much as Commissioner Yarborough and Commissioner Reardon, but I have an opinion on it. I don't really care what the outside public says. And I believe in my heart of hearts, because I think it's the right thing to do, for this motion to carry forward and for the department and the EMC to have a discussion with FDA and NCDA before this RIA moves forward. That is my opinion, not anybody else's.
I respect that, Mr. Baumgartner.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Baumgartner. Commissioner Twitty.
I'm not sure how this is going to move forward in any reasonable time frame. So I question, is there a possibility of establishing a working group outside of this or part of this committee outside of these meetings? If we try to have these discussions at every 2 or 3 months, we'll be here for the next 5 years, it seems to me. So is there a possibility of establishing some working group? We got 100 plus, we got through 2, I think, today, facetious, but we got a lot of questions, a lot of comments. A lot of them have value. That's going to take time to work through. Is there a way to establish a working group to work on this?
Answer your question, no, sir. I will not establish a working group outside. We've talked about it long enough. It's time to start getting things done. We have an OSBM approved RIA, and it has listed what the committee members have questions on, and they presented those to the department, and the department's answered those, and this is the first go around, and we'll do it as a committee of 7. Commissioner Reardon.
Yes, I want to make one comment. The idea that somebody else influenced me to do my own research or to influence my thinking, I reject that in every possible way. Every document that I pulled off a website is publicly available to anyone in this room or anyone listening. I just read the numbers. And so I'm just, again, going to reject any reference that anybody who's writing papers or is influencing me just bringing forward the data that's freely available. That feels what my public responsibility here is, to share with you what I have in front of me. And so I just want to be clear about that, since the others did, and I feel responsible too.
Commissioner Ellison.
I've received more phone calls and emails from outside individuals, somewhere around 200, that urged rapid and immediate action on PFAS based on these documents. My questions are my questions. And they're technical because some of these areas fall within my area of technical expertise, not agriculture like some of these other folks. But it does not serve the commission or the people of North Carolina to go forward to public notice and perpetuate this process when we know we have a severely flawed RIA that is in many cases predicated on fallacies, scientific fallacies.
Motion in a second.
We get that back up, please? Are we okay with people who are listening? Making sure the public is hearing these conversations.
I don't know.
Are we on the
exactly.
air?
I don't think so.
I want to make sure that the public is being informed of the conversation, so we need to get that up. Or we need to go into recess,
Yeah, 5 minutes.
go into a 5-minute recess. And I'm going to extend this meeting for 30 minutes.
I'm good.
Thank you. But, so let's take a 5-minute break while he gets it ready, please.
Does he
You
do
got it.
anything or is he going to go sit down?
We're going to take a 5-minute
You got a
break.
motion and a second on the table, Mr. Chairman. So whenever you come back.
Yes,
you
I
have a
got it. I
motion.
just want to make sure he's not on the air yet.
I would recommend you come back as soon as you get connection and not even wait 5
We are.
minutes.
He said 5 minutes.
I'm not trying to cause any mess. If that's the impression, I'm sorry, because that's not. That's part of the action here.
And we'll get to the next one.
This irrigating for 75.
You check
We're good, we're good. We're just going to get 5 minutes.
Hey, hang on a sec. Hey, that thing just, I hate to ask you, can I have your password? Everything just blinked out. Like yeah,
Where would you be without us?
I'd be in a bar right now.
Oh, I guess I can.
We want to get you to at some point.
Yeah, hang on, let me change it.
Yeah, we're gonna do, I'm gonna do either individual.
Stop right now.
Start. Oh, shit.
Back online.
This is really it started from the back, right? So if I reboot the front, it should be fine.
Well, I don't know about hot mics, but I mean, I assume you heard what just went on with Marion. Or just.
Have a meeting. See if I can get it out.
Okay, well, I say that's what they're trying to figure out right now to make sure it is working. Everybody knows that. I mean, it's been
Hacking around and saying,
I don't think that's the problem.
They've already proven it can't.
I was a little surprised that Marion was attacking him like that. That's just claiming he was attacking anybody. Good, it did.
Was that a good ad? I didn't mean to certainly make, I didn't want to get involved in this, Mr. Chairman, but I saw it, when I was looking at your percentages, I saw that.
If it's start back on.
All right, bye.
Are we good?
We're good.
Y'all want to get
We're good. By Chair King.
Yeah, the mics are apparently working, so.
Yeah, mics are hot, guys. Mics are good. Chairman King.
All right.
Let's come back to order, please. I believe our mics are hot and we're back on the air so the public can hear our discussion.
Yep. Darn, my comment didn't make it. Hang your gavel, man. I just did.
No,
I'm ready to get,
They can hear the audio. They can hear the audio on the WebEx.
okay, our mics are hot.
Yes.
Public can hear us tuned in. Okay, good.
The video is not working, but that's not an issue at this point.
But if we need to make reference to the next comments on property values and or other numerical standard pieces,
We'll work on it while y'all
we want
proceed.
that to be presented as well.
We'll figure it out.
Started.
Chair.
That was very helpful to put those up there too. 'Cause
Yes, sir.
we need that. The other thing is,
Yeah.
all this questions are in a minute.
Yeah, that's.
Was it not even letting me back in the?
That thing shut down.
Oh, okay.
I assume
Let's
it goes in
let's
there.
go ahead and get started again. The audio is working. They're working on the video. I just apologize for that happening for those who are listening, maybe some that are watching. There's a motion on the floor. And it's been seconded by Commissioner Bumgarner. And I need to have a quorum. We're in the middle of discussion.
What Deer
We have,
That's when she's back.
I would like Commissioner Deerhake to be sitting here as well. Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue discussion for just a minute or two further. We do have, again, Chairman Solomon here, who is ex officio. So if there are any comments, let's go ahead and finish those comments so we can get this motion out of the way. Raise your hands if you have any comments. Kevin?
I'm only requesting that we have that read one more time after the discussion is everybody sit with, because that was a long one.
It is. I'll have Commissioner Yarborough to read it.
My glasses back on.
But if there's more discussion, maybe we should do that.
The EMC Water Quality Committee does not accept nor take any action related to the RIA benefits category, human health benefits, also cited as human health in Table 20 or Appendix F in the section titled Estimated Exposure to Food Containing PFAS in North Carolina, until members of the EMC meet with FDA and receive a written response that the information related to the food in the U.S. and North Carolina is accurate.
That was seconded by Commissioner Baumgartner. Any other discussion? We'll call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye. No.
5 ayes and 2 noes. Okay, we'll move to the next item or part of
Were you an
the,
aye or a no?
I was a no.
Okay.
there was 2 noes and 5 ayes. There's 7 of us.
Seven? Okay, sorry. I misunderstood.
Okay. Now, the next part of the questions is Commissioner Baumgartner, go ahead and proceed with that next part, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the second benefit that we wanted to go over was relationship to private wells. And a lot of that can be found on C12, C43, C46, C62. Maybe there's some others. Commissioner Ellison had some questions or responses related to that and to these questions.
Okay, I'm going to try to go really quick, but on C47, quote, and this is of the department's responses to the questions and concerns raised by the committee. An important foundational connection that is the underpinning of multiple quantified and qualified benefits is the interconnected nature of surface and groundwater. This statement in one form of another or another is throughout sections of the department's response to the committee, and is the underpinning for avoided costs that are quantified as a benefit of this rule. The first citation given is from a USGS report that was apparently written as middle school curriculum and demonstrates how far the USGS has fallen since the days Luna Leopold was the chief hydrologist. The second citation, Squillance et al., is about atrazine in Iowa. A question to the department, do PFAS behave similarly to atrazine in the environment? Most of my questions are pretty quick hits, so,
Sure. Well, keep in mind that the atrazine citations are showing the proving that these interactions are valid and can be seen. But stepping back a bit, there is, in one of the slides we were going to show you, there is fundamental modeling and models that show that surface water and groundwater can interact differently depending on the height of the water table versus surface water.
And we'll get to that. I'm asking
Sure.
about atrazine compared to PFAS in the environment.
I think the points being missed is that that's a form of evidence, scientific evidence, that we can see this transport phenomenon happening.
Okay. So that particular citation, the full paper was behind a paywall, but the abstract, the groundwater surface water connection evidently that they discovered, quote from the abstract, whereas groundwater from the alluvial aquifer contributed at least 75% of the increase in load in surface water. Within the study area, tributaries aggregate most of the discharge from tile drains, and yet the tributaries still only contribute 25% of the increased loads of the main stem river, meaning the groundwater surface water interaction is the groundwater discharging with its pollutant load into the surface water. Groundwater collected through tile drains and discharged into tributary streams, and groundwater coming directly into, flowing directly into the main stem of the Cedar River. Question, do we have drumlins in North Carolina? Anybody know? Do we have eskers, glacial tills, loess, or prairie soils? It's a rhetorical trick, but I think we could find some reputable North Carolina citations or technical references for how ground and surface water interact and how pollutants move through the hydrologic cycle, instead of going to Iowa and coming up with something that basically refutes your point that surface water concentrations contaminate wells.
I would disagree with that. Like
I said, I couldn't see the whole paper. Well, okay, there's your model.
Yeah.
Has anybody looked into the question I asked in the July meeting that no one could answer? How many losing streams do we have in North Carolina?
I do not remember that question.
Okay.
But I think we need to consider that there is hydrologic dynamic that are going to occur over the course of the year. Increased well pumping has been demonstrated to have an influence of a losing stream, where you will see the stream impacting the groundwater.
And where has that been documented in North Carolina, where that groundwater was contaminated with PFAS?
I think we need to keep in mind that I would disagree that the basic fundamental science is not going to be different in North Carolina versus other locations. What we're trying to show you is a perspective look of what could be realized and the impacts of groundwater and surface water interactions.
Maybe, kind of, sort of, but the overwhelming preponderance of losing streams are in arid environments.
And I agree with
in
you.
the desert.
This
Now,
is
you can, let me finish. You can alter the groundwater surface water interactions by overpumping of wells.
Mm-hmm.
And that is possible, especially if those wells are used for public water supplies, like in the lower Cape Fear, where we know that happens. Okay. So we know that they have large public water supply wells. We don't know, you did not provide any information or documentation that those wells have negative effect on stream discharge. Do you have data to that effect?
No.
Okay.
But we're using the premise, as you've talked about, we're using the losing stream diagram here as just illustrative purposes of the conditions in which movement is happening. We're not saying that we're going to have that losing stream across North Carolina, like arid, like you're talking about. It is just for illustrative purposes of the conditions in which we would expect to see pollutants and water from surface water go to groundwater.
Okay. It is.
And there
I would
is.
suggest, in the interest of time, I'm going to cut you off because it is remotely possible that that occurs on a very localized basis. Okay. But it's not a prevalent condition in the state of North Carolina with our humid environment. It just doesn't happen. And geologically, not only do you need to be in an arid climate, but you have to have certain geologic conditions that would support a losing stream that, again, are pretty rare in North Carolina, especially given in the eastern part of the state where you would have the sediments where that possibly could occur. So much of Eastern 95 is high groundwater table to begin with. Surface water does not generate enough head to penetrate into the groundwater. It just doesn't happen. Okay. Oh, Chair Solomon.
And I know I'm ex officio, but can I just add?
Jump
here,
in.
'cause this is my expertise and I want to support
Mine
what you're
too.
saying. I guess, Stephanie, one of the things that I see, and by the way, I do appreciate, and I sent these on 7/31, my comments on this, that someone reminding me as an engineer with 35 years experience doing these kind of things, that the interaction of surface water and groundwater is a well-established fundamental engineering principle. I appreciate that because my name was on this. So y'all, I'd like to know who that engineer was, but I appreciate whoever your PE was that reminded me of that. Let me say this. There are all kinds of groundwater studies and assessments. And one of the things I found woefully lacking in this regard is we used to have a state geologist. We've got a department over there under Michael Scott that investigates movement of water. It's always much slower than we think. What I see missing to support you, Mr. Ellison, Commissioner Ellison, is I don't see any reference of North Carolina activities at all in here. And we should have a rich database from our hydrogeology and our hazardous sites cleanups and those type of studies that we've done. I don't know why they're missing, and it's really one of the things I requested here because I criticized the references. So I think we need references for North Carolina if we're making statewide North Carolina rules.
And every well in the state gets a permit. Counties are full of well records.
That's exactly.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bumgarner.
I would quibble that these are basic geological principles that engineers avail themselves of, but we can move on from that.
I can argue that.
So it appears from the RIA and the responses to our comments that most of the wells considered private wells are in the superficial aquifer. Is that correct? Am I interpreting your documents correctly? Do you have any data that supports that? Did you sample well records or anything like that? Or do you just assume they're all in the superficial aquifer?
Where's the question? Is it a response to?
It's a question that I'm asking in response to, yes, DEQ is stating that, where is this? Page C12 or something like that. DEQ is stating that PFAS found in shallow private wells can be attributed to surface water. Okay, so that's my question is, are you assuming that all of the private wells, the 80-some thousand private wells, are all shallow or in the superficial aquifer?
I think we might need a little more time looking into the answer to that question, but a lot of our wells, unfortunately, are superficial wells. So
Well,
it's not an outrageous
I
assumption.
understand. I'm trying to skipping stuff. Okay, do you have on your diagram of the losing streams, do you know where those losing streams are? And I'd asked this in July, but, or is it just a principle that you assume to occur somewhere in North Carolina?
Illustrative purposes of that exact figure, we looked at the hydrologic dynamics, as we've already alluded to show the interactions So yes, we are going off of that fundamental principle that under these conditions, surface water can impact groundwater.
Okay. Okay. And what are the geologic conditions, the lithologies where this might occur?
That I cannot answer, other than talking about the, the inward gradient, outward gradient water table, and under which we would see that occur.
Can you narrow it down to hydrophysiographic province?
That is going to be outside of what we're able
Yeah,
to answer.
okay. That's, and you know, this goes to show the weakness of the analysis from which you derive substantial economic benefits. I'll go to one last
I'll
point.
have to say I respectfully disagree. I think one of the things we're missing here on the regulatory impact assessment is it's a reasonable estimate. We are trying to use the best available science to predict in the future what would happen when we control PFAS discharges from NIPD's dischargers. Okay? I understand where you're coming from, but this is our best estimate of our benefits that we do believe that are going to be greatly underestimated due to the decades of discharges.
Okay, I would
We're
suggest.
trying to illustrate how these private wells could be impacted through these uncontrolled releases of PFAS.
Okay, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility, but in most of North Carolina, it's beyond the realm of probability. And I would suggest that a preliminary analysis would be a rather simple GIS exercise where you use statewide LIDAR, the attitudes of the respective geologic units, proximity to surface water, flood frequency curves, and stage discharge relations. From that, you would be able to determine the likelihood, frequency, and in some cases rates, because there's all kinds of geologic data, particularly in the wells, monitoring wells and the wells monitored by, related to the Camooers discharge. There's all kinds of data on transmissivity. So you would be able to make very reasonable, at least a pretty darn accurate first cut of where this happens, under what conditions, and then potentially, because you know where all the wells are, how big a problem that could be. Last thing I want to suggest, and I didn't see it in your little diagrams. Actually, two things to suggest. One, there are no PFAS in the French Broad Basin, very low concentrations of very few PFAS in some of the other river basins. Did you subtract private wells in the French Broad Basin from your statewide numbers, from which you calculate your estimated cost benefits?
We did not get that specific. We used our Keymoor specific private well detections above MCLs. We used our Bernard Allen Fund. We also used the information here in terms of ambient wells to look at where we see impact superficial wells, again, because we're only focusing on private wells, dog at that. And we used a 1 in 4, basically what we were seeing, not only through this information, but also some of our other public water supply hits for groundwater to estimate and project that 1 in 4 wells, private wells, could be impacted by PFAS.
But to clarify, of your 1 in 4 wells, that includes wells in the French Broad where there is no, even if it were remotely possible for surface water to contaminate the groundwater, it ain't happening because the contamination is not in the river itself. Is that correct?
I would be careful with that because that is preliminary information in terms of,
Okay.
we haven't sampled everywhere.
Okay, one last point. And if you could go back to your diagram, maybe I'll see it, but it's a little too far from my old eyes. It is remotely possible that surface water during a very large flood could get to the vicinity of a well, which I'm not really seeing on your diagram, but that is remotely possible. However, if the well's been properly developed and sealed, then the likelihood drops like a rock. Another point to consider, and I just pulled these this morning, the Cape Fear River at Tar Heel this morning at 9 o'clock was flowing at 1,570 cubic feet per second. The 50% AEP is 36,800 cubic feet per second. Okay, that's the 2-year storm. The 10% AEP is 57,000. So we're talking orders of magnitude, massive difference. So if you have some concentration in most of North Carolina's rivers, and it does overflow its banks, you're looking at dropping the concentrations to de minimis, minuscule, undetectable amounts. So just wanted to point that out on your surface water, groundwater. I really think that the department needs to avail itself of some very simple techniques. You've got a lot of good geologists in the department that understand these things, and I think you need to rein in this unproven assumption that surface water is contaminating these groundwater wells. It is possible, and it may actually be a contribution, but I think if you really looked into it, you'd see a lot more groundwater contaminating surface water.
All right, we need to move on, but Commissioner Tweedy.
Yeah, I'm going to start with a citation because we've been a lot of talk about the science. This is from my textbook from grad school, Water Quality Prevention, Identification, and Management of Diffuse Pollution by Novotny and Olam, 1994. Chapter 7, page 387. Groundwater and surface water systems are interconnected by recharge of surface water into groundwater zones, and by discharge of groundwater into surface systems. In many cases, surface water bodies are an extension of the groundwater systems. Perennial streams may be both recharging groundwater zones, or groundwater is discharging as a base flow into the streams. So we're not talking about a crazy concept here. There are three scenarios I can see. Commissioner Ellison mentioned one where you have floodwaters that expand. The other would be, and you mentioned hydrologic head. So you have to have a higher head here to move water to a lower head here. That could happen in a situation where rivers flood but don't go out of bank. So Raleigh gets a torrential rain, the flood stage or the river in Goldsboro rises 6 feet. That could create a hydrologic head between the river and the adjacent lands that moves water from surface water to groundwater. The other is, Stephanie mentioned, was the cone of impact from wells are pulling up water from the groundwater. So that creates a hydrologic head too. So that the physical process is very well known. I'm not sure why this is causing consternation. Maybe it's the terms. Gaining stream typically is what we have in the east on an average condition. Losing streams are typically more out west. But I would argue any stream in North Carolina under certain conditions can be gaining or losing. And yes, it's a small percentage at a time, but we're talking about very small concentrations here. One, if Google is to be believed, one drop in 20 Olympic swimming pools is 1 part per trillion. We're talking about standards here, potentially 4 parts per trillion, maybe 100 parts per trillion has been very, very small numbers. So if you're even getting small occurrences of this, and we know that some of the floods that we have in eastern North Carolina cover miles even from the rivers, that water gets stored in depressions. When the rivers recede, that water has to then infiltrate to go, and so that puts a source of the contaminants in the groundwater as well. So Stephanie mentioned numerous times here that she's illustrating, the point is to illustrate the concept of how this connection can happen. The quantification is an issue. I don't know that there's any studies out there, certainly probably not in North Carolina, maybe not anywhere, that can say, okay, so what effect is this loss or this pathway occurring and in what concentrations? But the premise is that there is a connection and surface waters are affecting groundwater. So I think that's a fairly logical conclusion. To what extent, I think, could be the question.
I would suggest that if the channel rises but does not get out of bank, then you do have bank storage of the floodwater. But again, if you that one drop in a swimming pool, if you're going up from 1570 to 36,800 CFS, That's less than one drop in a swimming pool.
It was 1 drop in 20 swimming pools.
Okay. Thank you. I stand corrected. And the other part of that, as you know, that as the stream is coming up, if it's a bunch of storms, then the groundwater from infiltration is also coming up and helping to equilibrate that head. And as stage decreases within the channel, then the groundwater is a little slower than that and is actually discharging into the channel as the water surface recedes in the stream. So that bank storage doesn't have much time to go very far into the ground until the groundwater pushes it back out. And it's also in very close proximity to the stream. So it's not going that far subsurface. Now, inundation is a different story. And again, that can all be simulated fairly easily.
There's points that have been made that some of the assertions on the use of private wells in the IRA maybe needs some different discussion, needs to be adjusted. The last benefit, talking about property values. So one question that I had in relation to this is you referenced property value impacts based on groundwater and groundwater impacts. Since this is a surface water rule, is there any property value impacts based on surface water? I've never heard of any. As in a property is devalued because of surface water on or adjacent to the property?
Going off of here, no, we did not just look at surface water impacts on property value. We looked at the interconnected nature of these two resources, looked at impact of private wells using the same premise that we've talked about in the previous benefit, and then deemed based off of the literature and other foundational sources of other contaminants that could devalue a property, to then link that if those private wells are impacted, then their property value could be impacted. Again, this is a prospective look to show you that we do believe that as we sample, we will see more of a widespread impact on private wells. We could see additional impacts on property value as we understand those, as residents start to understand those potential impacts and devaluation as a prospective look.
I go back to, this is a surface water rule. It seems like these arguments should have been better made in the next meeting we're having on groundwater rather than say surface water rule.
Well, we have to keep in mind that the 2L rule is a cleanup standard where contamination has already happened. In 2B, we are trying to avoid further discharge of uncontrolled release of PFAS that can contribute to risk to human health and the environment. And that's mainly going to be industrial properties that you're going to see through DWM where we would be able to, implement those 2L cleanup standards as well.
Ex officio member Chair Solomon, you had some research you did on property values related to this topic. Do you have any input this time?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm back to the citations. It feels like we've got a narrative we're trying to make, and then we're putting citations and references in to support that. I didn't really get a positive response. I will say this, somebody went back and added a bunch of peer-reviewed comments, and they took exception with the paper from 2019 on real estate values in Michigan, I believe, from an undergraduate student. And then the graduate paper, unsigned master's thesis from a guy in Delaware as justifications for property values in North Carolina decreasing. And then the peer review comments, somebody said, well, that's peer reviewed. That's from professors. And we'll have to dig deeper. We've got some professors here, but that's really not peer reviewed. Maybe it's academic out of a university, but it's not normally what we call peer review. And we can go through that. But needless to say, those aren't good sources. And I'm really disappointed. The department seemed to blow me off in that. I did my own research again to the intake. I spent several hours going through this through the Zillow and the Reddit sites and came up with the increases. That's what these other people try to do in other states. The department didn't do that. Very reasonable. I did not see any fall off in values in the Cape Fear River Basin where we've had PFAS contamination for years. And so I'm really disappointed that the department can't come forward and is holding their ground, that they can't find better real estate property references to support their claims, and they're standing by this RA.
And I do understand, Chair Solomon, your concern about the uses of dissertations. We do feel like that is in a way peer reviewed because it is professors that are working with those students, and not everything does get published. Mainly, maybe they just didn't want to, not necessarily that it couldn't get published. But I do want to add that
there's a definition of peer review. I think there's a legal definition of peer review.
Okay.
Single blind, double blind, the whole 9 yards. And I'm telling you, if you go out there on the web and other sources, university sources, they don't consider undergraduate papers as peer reviewed. Even if now, I may be wrong on that. But my bigger point is, why are we using undergraduate papers and even the graduate's master's thesis, the entire state of North Carolina, when these people have never set foot in North Carolina and the references are 4 or 5 years old about places in foreign lands? I don't get it.
So to follow up, 2 of the additional resources that we added, one was a peer-reviewed journal article that was looking at property devaluation as well. That was on the higher end of the 31 to 42%, which we did not use in our calculation. But most importantly, one of the other citations that I also believe Marion had talked about in terms of resources to use is expert reports for natural resource damages. And that citation looked at property devaluation through contamination from 3M in Minnesota.
You went to one real estate agency, but why don't you go to NC Realtors? Why don't you go to Zillow like I did? Why is something that an NC member?
Zillow's not going to Zillow's going to
They
capture
the increase in property value.
and we're not refuting that. We use the valid. What we're trying to say is that there is established appraisal property processes that through chemical contamination, there can be devaluation of property.
Over 36 years, even after it's cleaned up or reduced or.
Yeah, there can,
I'm
in
sorry.
that
I'm
one-
gonna get off of it. I'm gonna get off of it.
Well,
I do basic research, and I've been accused by a fellow commissioner of letting outside forces do it. This is beyond the grade. I did my own research. I asked you guys to give me back something mean, and you just want to argue. But I'm done.
All right, so that's wrapping up all the question and answers that I had, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if,
Commissioner Baumgartner, I have one,
I have a motion.
I have one,
No, I have a suggestion.
I have a comment, and it was passed out a few minutes ago, and Chairman Solomon, I appreciate your comments. But I got one piece on this that I need to get out on the property values. I would respectfully, Commissioner Baumgartner, let me have 5 minutes. I just spoke with Chair Reardon about his next meeting, and he told me that get out of here by 5. He's got a little bit, one action item, but I do want to bring this up because Commissioner Deerhake passed me this note, and I had not seen it. But I feel obligated as chair to share it, and I would like Commissioner Deerhake to share it because she passed it out, and I haven't seen it. But it said, "Good evening, Steve. I reviewed the yellow highlights in the file you sent the members. See attached. My comments are shown in the Adobe bubbles tracked to specific text. DWR staff will need to review each bubble for my detailed comments." She's made comments, but number 1 with 3 bullets. She's got 3 observations to make about reduced property value. And for the public that are listening, I would like her to read those 3 bullets because it pertains to exactly what we're talking about. Commissioner Deerhake?
Thank you. I say, in my opinion, the information received recently, which argues that regional property values are not impacted by PFAS contamination, is not granular enough to be useful. And I'm referring to the, some of the assumptions and the statements that were made by other commissioners about, we have proof that there is no impact to the regional property values. I didn't think they were granular enough to make that assertion because it's very site-specific where these contaminations are happening. Second bullet, aside from the graduate students' theses, which some members say are not useful because they have not been published in peer-reviewed journals, other sources of information that could be used to support DWR's analysis may be case studies such as PFAS class action lawsuits, settlement agreements, enforcement cases, et cetera. She just referred to that. And then I said, for your information, members appeared to be comfortable with accepting non-peer-reviewed studies when the Water Quality Committee approved a separate action item in July. That's the Salisbury decision. There was a master's or PhD document involved in that. And then third, conclusions drawn from hedonic studies may not need to be pollutant specific. The general findings of such studies that actual and or perceived pollution/contamination reduces land value may be applicable and relevant for qualitative analysis purposes.
I wanted her to read that because it concerns the property values. And as I looked at C42 and 43 as the approved OSBM, that was released to the public August the 30th. And of course, Commissioner Deerhake had sent that to everyone on August the 6th. But August the 30th, it was released to the public. And the day before yesterday, I got a letter from a lady who lives in the upper Cape Fear. And she sent it to every one of us, and she sent it to a House member and to a Senate member. And the second paragraph, it says, our family owns several hundred acres of farm and woodlands along the northeast Cape Fear River, just a few miles downstream from the Lear Corporation plant outside of Kenansville. This river has been a cherished part of our lives since Governor Trine signed the land over to my husband's great-grandfather ×9 before the Revolutionary War. I read that, and I read it twice because it wasn't from anybody that I've been receiving emails from, like NC Chamber and the 9 or 10 others that signed off on that letter that we got the other day that was sent to everybody. So I took it personal when I read that from a lady that here's property that's been affected by what she says is upstream contamination. So my question is, moving forward on these comments on the reduction in property value from PFAS impacts, 5% was assumed based on various studies as a conservative estimate, the physical analysis. That's on C42. What studies? I mean, she tells me what's going on in the Cape Fear according to what she's got in several hundred acres of land that she owns on the river at Cape Fear, but what's happening in the other parts of the state? That's my concern, is that we are going to regulate it, but if we regulate it for the whole state, what's the alternatives for these source? Is there a source reduction plan? How are we working that? And how are we working the monitoring piece as we move forward throughout the state? So I don't want to reach an impasse where we can't discuss it through the whole committee. But she goes on to say, in the second, moreover, it has come to my attention that some members of the commission may be influenced by lobbying efforts from various polluters, including Clamores. It is alarming and disheartening to think that corporate interests might be compromising our environmental and public health regulations. There might be a meltdown in social media in what she's reading from New Hanover, Brunswick, or Pender, or Duplin. But I don't want it to be a meltdown on this committee. We have to set a rule for the state. And if we're going to be the first out of the gate, I don't want to be embarrassed. I saw all of your pieces that you have made reference to. There's 10 pages in one area of the RA, and it has over 100 links. I've tried to read them all. But I can tell you, most of them have gone to the, the EPA. That's where you're pulling every one of them has an EPA. And that, but there are no EPA standards on surface water. So I want to finish up and I know time is running short. But I'm going to give it back to our questioning manager, and I think he's recognized Chair Solomon, but I just want to say that about the value of property, not just agriculture, but the properties, the thousands of acres in our state. And we heard earlier about the streams and just waters, lakes, rivers. So as we move on, I want to regulate it and I want to move on. But we're not ready right now. So what we've got on the floor, I don't want an impasse. I really want to work it out. So with that, I've said enough.
Chair Solomon, you've heard all of the discussion, been part of some of it. You've heard Chair King. What's your take as ex officio member, chair of the commission? How can we get past this impasse? We've discussed it with the department about making some changes. Doesn't seem like that's what they want to do. Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the fact that we're having these debates, and we got to get through just not benefits, we got to get through costs, we got to get through environmental impacts. As Commissioner Tweedy said, we're a long way if we keep on this track as I'm watching this. The other thing that I know, and I've given this to Commissioner Keenan, I've talked to the department about it in the past, but as I sit here and listen today and watch everything that's built to this point, outside letters from the secretary, all these debates, it tells me that we've got an issue that we've quite not expanded enough alternatives. And I go back to the groundwater IRA to look at alternatives, and I'm going to suggest this, and y'all can make this a motion if you want or not, but this is how we get through this, I think, is that our current alternatives are basically the same numeric ways. We just split the timing up two ways. We're required to have two other alternatives in the primary, but we're really not changing things that much. The groundwater one had a do nothing or a status quo, or I think they called it a business as usual. Because they said in groundwater, y'all don't have to do anything. There's no requirement. Maybe the right thing to do, but there is no federal requirement for you to do this. There's no state requirement. So that is one alternative. And I think what I would say for this group, my suggestion would be is you add an alternative just to get the alternatives robust enough, but is to say there's a status quo plus require monitoring for every industrial and municipal NPDES permit. Now, the department's going to say they've got that ability or they may not, but the point here is not to take something away, but to make sure whatever we have as far as NPDES permit monitoring for industrial and municipal NPDES permits, that it's a carte blanche that every one of those has to test for PFAS. Okay? And that if it's there already, that's fine. But that would be the first suggestion on the low end motion alternative. The second alternative I would say as we build to this is the status quo, everything I just said with that monitoring for those sources, plus PFAS source protection reduction plans for every industrial NPDES permit and every significant industrial user, SIU, that are part of a municipal pretreatment program. And so what that really means is we force them to identify those industrial users, how much PFAS they're using, and what they're going to do to reduce it, and we get them on the record. And some of them are going to comply and some of them won't, but we're going to slowly choke that off. Now, I told Director Rogers months ago that I thought that's where we definitely had consensus as a group. We want to reduce source water, and we don't want those polluters to pay. Source protection plans are the best way to do that. And so the monitoring plus the source protection as the second alternative. And I believe that if we want to go short here and get this done and get some progress on PFAS, that's where we can find the easier way. If we keep these debates up going, we'll be here for months trying to work through all this. And then we're probably going to have regulated community and enviro groups going crazy. But I think everybody will be able to agree on source protection plans, as I just said. So I'm trying to give y'all the way that I see after listening to all this for months now and finally getting an RA that we can look at, that we do that. I know we're already bound by the food thing, so we still got to look at the food. We still got to go that direction. But this provides two other alternatives and we can go into source protection. And EPA accepts this. This is in the EPA toolbox and EPA says you can do it. And Michigan's being held up as a state that does this on a regular basis.
What was the department's response when you brought this to the director's attention months ago?
They just, not months ago, several weeks ago, we talked about it. And it was just, they just listened to it as Chair Keene did, but it was written down. This is something that's been weeks ago that was given to people just to say, hey, I don't think we're debating about all these costs and all these benefits and all this. I don't think the part of the RIA that considers alternatives is robust enough. And I just look at what was in the groundwater RIA, and this one is not consistent. So we make it more consistent with that, and we may have an alternative here we can run with. So that would be my suggestion. But if you made a motion, it would be something with those two alternatives, status quo monitoring plus source protection. So that's as I sit here to try to help y'all move this along.
Just ask you.
One question on that. So what would that look like if this committee made a motion to move towards a source protection plan? Is this a revision of the current IRA to reflect that and then moving forward with everything that's in the IRA now in the meantime? Or what's your concept?
You would have a hole in the benefits till we get with FDA on this numeric alternative. But if you added the other two alternatives, one's pretty close to the baseline. It's not going to have a lot of cost in it, but it's going to have big benefits. And the source protection is going to have huge benefits and low cost. So that is a path to go down. I think the department could probably get that ready within the next meeting or two. Certainly the next couple of meetings give us time to get with FDA on that part. But if we can't get with FDA, we still have a viable alternative here. And it may not even be a significant one to have a major RA needed on the source protection plans.
Mr. Tweedy. Can we give the department an opportunity to give their comment on
That's
this?
what I was just going to ask.
If they so choose.
Just a couple of things. We could do minimization and type of plan that you're talking about, but we need measurable value that they're going to a goal. You can't assess costs unless you have timeframes that you're looking at and a measurable goal. So we need to all come to some agreement on this number that you're referring
Right.
to.
And I would like to look at the Michigan program, if you want to go online and you look at the EPA toolbox for source protection plans, and they don't talk a lot about having to establish a quantitative basis. In fact, they don't talk about it at all. So I think that would be something we would all have to look at. I agree. But to reduce sources, it's normally come to source reduction. Comes to treatment. It comes to leave,
Sure,
the
and-
source reduction plans, and y'all were doing that. You're
I
doing it
want
with
to be very clear,
Shelby.
that's what we're doing. And we'd love to have the EMC support to be sent, we're modifying all the permits, major POTW permits and major industrial permits to include PFAS sampling and at the SIUs. You made a comment I need clarification on though. You said we were going to regulate the SIUs, which discharge the POTWs. Are we actually coming up with BAT numbers for those? Or are we just, are you going to regulate the POTW, give them a number and they go back to the SIUs?
My intent would be to go to the industrials and not drag the municipals in for their significant industrial users. But you may tell me, as you work the details, it's better to go through the municipality. And that's okay, because we can take that to the public and let people comment on where in the food chain that happens. But just like your presentation today, there's a lot of significant industrial users upstream of the POTW. But the POTW is not causing the PFAS. It's the people upstream we're trying to get to. And the direct industrial
Correct,
discharge.
but it's the POTW that regulates them, so.
Right, so you can figure that out. But my intent here would be not to necessarily go after POTWs as far as source reduction, unless you have to do that to get to the significant industrial users. That would be the motion. So I would like it to be significant industrial users, and y'all come back and say, well, this is how we do that.
Yeah, and you're saying Michigan doesn't give them any numbers to work with?
Not to my knowledge. But again, I'm an individual on a
Yeah.
website and that's being held up by people that are suing EPA over drinking water standards.
I can add that, the tiered approach in terms of bins 1, 2, and 3 for Michigan, they do set, basically, you're in one bin if you have no PFO or PFAS, you're in a second bin if you have sources found, but your POTW effluent is less than the water quality standard, and then you're in bin 3 if you're above the water quality standard. So yes, there is a target as
Right.
the director.
Which makes sense. Industry wants a target. They don't want to just put in a little bit of treatment when they could put in the right treatment.
Correct. But I think we could look at how other states have done this, especially Michigan, and look at those bins and say, maybe that's a 30% reduction, but y'all, we can get in negotiations with the troubled ones. I really believe that most of these folks aren't going to want to be in the crosshairs of this any longer, and they will move away from it, and we will get the desired effect in the short term if we'll just require these, make sure we got monitoring and all these sources, and we got these source reduction plans, we will push the ball forward a lot easier than arguing about.
So I'm just curious, would this be part of our overall goal of implementing surface water quality standards? Is this just completely separate?
I think this would be a building step to the next level. We have to look at this anyway in 3 years. We should but this would be a 3 to 5 year plan that we would settle for this for now as the uncertainties, as you guys have indicated in the report, there's a lot of uncertainty still, and Stephanie's in 3 to 5 years, we're going to have the uncertainties worked out. But while we're working through the uncertainties, we can reduce PFAS.
So procedurally, we're looking at two tracks. We're looking at a track for source reduction, if we made the motion as committee so deemed. The department would develop a regulatory impact analysis based on an alternative for source reduction as well, and modeling, yes.
Monitoring and then monitoring and source reduction.
And that would be moved through to the next meeting, hopefully. And then on the separate track, we would continue our discussions on what we have in front of us now with the regulatory impact analysis we have now and the moving forward PFAS standards. All that discussion would go on separate tracks. So the source reduction plan and monitoring could go ahead and move forward and get implemented while we're working on this other.
Yes.
Let me add something to that, if I might. The point reduction, point source, non-source. If we start the monitoring piece, you mentioned a few minutes ago about municipalities. In a non-point source. Moving forward, I think municipalities and county governments needs to be somewhere in this, playing in this game to figure out property values, for assessing property values and doing revals and understanding where they are in the state. For those that are around lakes, reservoirs, watersheds, I think somewhere I might be off.
I think, and let me say this, I think you are. Purpose and need here is to take PFAS out of the surface waters.
That's correct.
And that's what we need to focus on. And we need to focus on that in November and or January and get that out so that we can start getting progress. As you just said, if we spin and bring all the non-point dischargers, everybody else, we're going to continue to spin.
Right.
So I don't think we've spun yet. But I can see the path, as Kevin said, we can talk about these meeting after meeting.
Yep.
This is the first meeting we've had where we've had the full approved document and the ball's not moving forward very fast. And I don't think the alternative is robust. So there is the path, if you ask me as
I
chairman.
understand. I just wanted to bring that out as a question. Go ahead.
I think the assessment issues and the property values and all that stuff, groundwater, surface water interactions, a lot of these things need a lot more work from the department. So it's almost like the current proposed rule and RIA gets set aside and sent to the repair shop. And we start driving with
We're still
the
moving.
monitor.
We're still moving.
We're still moving.
We're trying to get
but
to numeric standards at some point.
But it needs a lot of work.
You're right.
While on a parallel track, we're moving forward with
Right.
monitoring and tracking and source reduction.
Source reduction of those industrial sources, yes.
Industrial, yes. Okay. So you want to continue or are you ready to finish up?
So does the department and the EMC have the authority to do this now, or does this have to go to a public review process, or?
I think, don't we need a rule?
We need the department to go back and do, again, what we have to do in a proposed rulemaking package is an RA and the proposed rule. That's the only two things, that's the major things that we approve as an EMC to go out. So we have to have the department and us work on that to get that completed. I think, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I think there's enough templates out there that we can move this pretty fast because it's pretty close to the baseline, but it's the source reduction plans will take a little time. But this gives us a shot to get something in November or January where I don't see us having a good shot as we currently struggle through this document with all the things we got.
But we do need to agree on targets.
And we can meet on that and talk on that if we need to, yes.
I'm ready to go ahead and call for a motion if there's one that's going to be on the floor in reference to our discussion on this.
We can follow up and get that.
Did you have a question?
Just give me some stuff from this.
I'm still a little confused on, so this is going to require a new rule and a new RIA to be developed?
Yes,
Parallel track.
parallel tracks.
These are still the alternatives, Kevin, within this RA. If we decide we get to a point, all these technical things can be resolved with this numeric proposal that's currently on the table, maybe we go with it, right? But I'm saying we need some other alternatives in this RA anyway that says you don't have to do anything. Because the first thing the public's going to come to us and say is, why are you doing anything? There's going to be a group of people, and just like we did in the groundwater RA, they recognize that. They said, EMC, you don't have to do anything. And we're not required to do anything. Do we want to do something? Sure we do. Yes, we do. But that's got to be the first alternative, is this business as usual as the groundwater RA laid out for us. And then we can add the source protection as the second alternative. And the numeric could be a third. But we may get to the end of the rope and say, we've got this monitoring and source protection so close that we can make it happen now. And we need to get on with it, get it to the public.
Could we recognize the deputy
Tim, no,
secretary, please?
I'm not yet. Tim was getting ready to.
Yeah, you called for a motion, Mr. Chairman.
I did.
I'll go ahead and make the motion. I want to move that the department move forward with a rule development and regulatory impact analysis that establishes monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and PFAS source reduction plans, and develop PFAS source reduction plans for every industrial NPDES permit, significant SESIU that are part of a municipal pretreatment program. Move that the department develop a rule that requires monitoring for NPDES dischargers, as well as develop source reduction plans, which would include rule development and a new regulatory impact analysis, so we can move forward.
Motion's on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Ellison. Any discussion? Commissioner Twitty and
I would ask
Commissioner Deerhake.
that we recognize the deputy secretary.
Well, let's discuss through the committee before we recognize the podium, please.
Yeah, it's
Any
obvious she has
discussion?
something to say that may have influence on this, so I would
Well,
like to hear. I
we
would
got a
like to
motion
hear
on
her
the floor
opinion.
and seconded. So the committee, I'm going to ask the committee, do they have any comments? Do you have any comments?
I do not.
Okay. Commissioner Deerhake, do you have any
Thank you.
comments?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead,
thank-
please.
I appreciate the chairman's creative thinking on this. I'm still not certain I understand if we can add an alternative without going through the health and environmental justification analysis for this. So it brings us back to the debate that we have about the original health-based numbers that some people are challenging. And then also, I want to make sure I understand why this is not, why these actions that we're thinking about are not already an integral part of the NPDES permitting and the pre-treatment program already. Why isn't that something that we should be doing already?
You asking me?
Yes, sir.
Ex officio, can I speak as ex officio with a motion on the
Yes, you
table?
may.
I think that honestly, we've been so focused and I say we, but the department's been so focused on this numeric standard that this is one of those things. We've asked to give some insights on some of our references and our opinions on this, and we've tried. But I think we're at an impasse. And so I don't want to blame anybody at this point. I want to get it done for the people of the state, and I want to get PFAS reductions in surface water. So how we got here doesn't matter. I don't see the clear path forward that would get us on the street within the next meeting.
Well, I think we all agree that an effective pretreatment program is the solution to everything. We can achieve the standard that the department has brought to us with an effective pretreatment program. The BAT, I heard BAT, are we talking about the BAT at the municipal treatment plant, or are we talking about BAT at the pretreatment source, I mean, the significant industrial user source? We're going to get back into the debate about BAT. We already have with each and every permit. So it's nice, creative approach to going to it, but I think we're going to come back to some of the same debates that we've been having before.
And I acknowledge that we might, because we're trying to do source reduction, and not everybody, I'll say it my way, not everybody's going to say they can. And then we're going to have to come back and figure out ways to force them to do it. And again, I can't speak for, but we give incentives for a lot of things. There may be certain people that we agree they can't get it, but we still want to reduce, and maybe the General Assembly has to do something to help those people along. But this way we keep it with the industrial discharger, so we can identify who the bad player is and make them pay. And not just spread it out to the whole watershed, because we can't agree on what all that stuff is right now. I want to get this out. I want to get this moving.
Yep. Thank you, Commissioner Ellison.
I would suggest that, and I think on the human health, I think we all generally know that some of these compounds, if not most of these compounds, are very, very bad in very, very trace amounts. Setting the health aside, risk assessment component and the costs and the benefits, there's a lot more disagreement. And I think that more information only gives us a more informed decision as far as how we expect future water quality criteria to fall out. And in the interim, while this program gets going, we can be working out some of the multifarious issues we have with the current RIA for the current proposed rule. So like Chair Solomon has said, it's moving. And it's moving, and because it's collecting more information, and it's also getting the polluters on notice, basically, we're going to know, and the department's going to know exactly what they got. And it is progress. It's incremental. It may not be what everybody wants, but it is progress, rather than waiting for us to continue arguing with the department over groundwater and farms and real estate values.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellison. Commissioner Twitty.
All right, one final, this seems like a status quo proposal, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. So I'll direct that to anybody that can answer that question. Doesn't the department already have the ability to do this through their permitting of NPDES? So are we just talking about a status quo of where we already are, and it's going to therefore have the same problems that we're trying to alleviate with a standard? And maybe Deputy Secretary can provide insight.
Briefly.
In December 2021, I believe, EPA Assistant Administrator of Water actually released a guidance memorandum to states. In that memorandum, they basically said states can require monitoring using the methods that 1633 that became finalized recently. They can also do BMP with the facilities in order to get a step ahead of any kind of water quality criteria that the feds or the state may establish. It was a way they basically did exactly what you're saying, Chair Solomon, which is monitor, know who are the big players, and begin those early actions to reduce. And we have the authority to do that. And that is exactly what Julie was talking about. We started requiring monitoring and permits almost a year ago as they became opened up. So this is not something we're not doing. We can do that. We accounted for those costs in this RIA. The question that I have for you all is we're going to need guidance to require source reduction and associated plans. Are there any teeth to that? Is this mainly voluntary? Is this going to be up to those sources to say, okay, we have PFAS to this level, and here's what we can do? What are we going to be asking? So we're going to need some directions in order to produce a credible RIA, in order to produce a rule text that you all think meets this process.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, when someone asks, are we achieving reductions? We want to be able to answer this question, which is Commissioner Tweedy's question. Where are we going to be 5 years from now, if that's the time frame we're looking at? Will these big, large sources, will they have reduced their PFAS, and to what extent? And will the rules define that?
Right.
We really encourage you all to think about those kind of guideposts, if that is an alternative you're thinking of.
We are. Commissioner Ellison.
I think that,
Commissioner Ellison's got a question for,
no, it's just coming. I think we want to end up in the same place. And I think if we work with the department and the department works with us, then we can get there. And that means no RIAs 15 minutes after a meeting starts or.
Yeah, but let me just say this, the thing, I'm gonna agree with the secretary on, there is some, to put these in on every permit, on everybody, and it can be debatable with what powers they have through EPA and all that. We need a rule and standard, we need an RA and we need a rule. And so what I'm saying is, we're not gonna cherry pick them, we're not gonna find the problem ones, we're gonna blitz this thing across the state, and it's gonna be unlimited, they're gonna have the power to do this to everybody.
That's right.
And we're gonna get to the bottom of the PFAS thing.
Thank you.
Start, that's where I'm trying to go with the rule.
Good.
And we can, yeah.
Good point. And I think that the committee is there. We have a motion on the floor and it's been seconded. And that's through the discussion piece. Would you reread the motion, please? That's on the floor.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and require PFAS source reduction plans as part of municipal pretreatment program.
And it was seconded.
It's the motion I had before.
Develop a rule in RIA.
And develop a rule, associated rule in RA.
Rule, to develop a proposed rule.
Proposed rule,
to
yes.
support monitoring plus,
Source reduction.
the force reduction. plan. So
Establish
we're
mon-
requesting them to do a proposed rule. That's what
Develop a proposed rule in RA to establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit
And municipal MPDS permit.
and require PFAS source reduction plans as part of municipal pretreatment program.
Industrial and SIUs and municipal pretreatment program.
All right.
And they can correct us if they need something different to get to the SIUs, but.
Now let's get that close. Let's get it.
Because they're doing a proposed rule. And we've heard them that we need to give them guidance back.
Let's just take a moment, get the motion right.
Establish
For the record.
monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit
Yes, for every industrial municipal permit.
and require PFAS source reduction plans
For every industrial and SIU as part of a municipal pretreatment program.
Make sure that they understand the motion.
SIU plans.
SIU.
SIU.
Part of a municipal pretreatment program.
As part of every,
Industrial and SIUs as part of a municipal pretreatment program. But industrial dischargers discharging directly and some discharging as SIUs to municipal programs.
move to direct the department to propose a draft rule and a draft RIA to establish monitoring for every industrial and NPDES permit and require PFAS source reduction plans as part of every industrial and SEIU municipal pretreatment program.
That's close.
Seconded by Commissioner Allison. Does anyone have any questions on that? Or discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That is, are you finished with the Q&A part?
I am finished with the Q&A, sir.
Are there? Yeah, it's abbreviated.
Yeah, it was abbreviated.
With that said, then we will conclude this meeting with the groundwater in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Commissioner Reardon?
We're going to take 5.
5 minutes is groundwater, but we have a director's report. That is part of the agenda, that the director come up and give his report to the committee. If there's anything you'd like comments?
Real briefly, there are a couple items that the committee has been considering that I want to mention and provide a status of. One is the narrative report, narrative standard report that we're working on. We've received comments. We are working through those and committed to get those back to the committee. Middle of this month is our goal here, so that y'all can start looking at and reviewing them and get together, and hopefully we'll be having a review in November by committee of a final draft. That's where we are there. The triennial review is another piece that we're looking to work through. We were delayed a bit in our ability to move that on to OSBM. We were waiting for a report out of the collaboratory as it related to some work done on the cost for treatment of 1,4-dioxane. We wanted to make sure we included that in our RIA to have a complete review of that. So just wanted those, we're working on those, we continue to work on those, and they'll be forthcoming to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Rogers. And thank you, everyone, for your robust engagement to this committee. And I appreciate everyone in the service that you're doing for this committee and working it forward. But thank you again for attending. Thanks for the audience, and thanks for those who are online. The meeting is adjourned.
Is it a long?